Good evening, everyone. Let's go ahead and call this meeting to order. It is 6 o'clock on August 10th. Introduce the folks up at the table with me. To my right, Superintendent Matt Degner. We have Directors Lisa Williams, Dromi Etsy, and Janet Godwin. And to my left, Vice President Ruthina Malone, JP Clausen, and Charlie Eastham, and Recording Secretary Kim Colvin. The public is reminded that if they wish to speak, they need to complete a speaker form found out in the lobby and can turn it in to Kim at the end of the table. And during community comment, persons may speak to the board about topics relevant to the district, and all community comment directed at non-agenda items and agenda items shall take place at the beginning of the meeting during the community comment section of the agenda. Before that, I would like to say just a few words in remembrance of a former board member. Connie Champion passed away last week. She was a board member for 9 years in the late 80s and early 90s. A lot of you might hear that name and say that sounds familiar because she was also a 16-year member of the Iowa City Council, I think the longest serving member of the council, and was also a local business owner. And I think she once said between all of those elections that she had never lost an election going back to grade school student government. So that she was an advocate for our schools and our community. And so just like to just say those kind words in remembrance of Connie. So with that, we can move into our community comment section. Thank you for your interest in the Iowa City Community School District and your willingness to share your comments. You're reminded to give your name, address, and topic on which you would like to speak. During community comment, persons may speak to the board about topics relevant to the district. Comments shall be limited to 4 minutes per speaker, and the initial community comment period shall be limited to an hour. So we'll get right into it. And the first one I have up is actually a group of students, so I can call you all up here. Maddie Rule, Lena Davies, Sarah Smith, and Caitlin Hodges. You are free to come up to the mic.
We are all here for the Liberty Dance Team, and we have chosen to be here to support each other as we request that you allow us to have out-of-state travel to be able to go to regionals competition in Chicago and nationals competition in Florida.
We have worked very hard for this, and we have earned our ticket to nationals by attending a universal dance camp, summer camp, and dancing well enough to qualify. We love performing at football games under the lights and basketball games in the gym to support our high school athletic teams, as well as dancing when the band blares out the fight song along with the rest of the student body. More than that, we are a competition dance team. It is our dream every season to attend the Universal Dance Association National Competition in Orlando in February, to compete against the best teams in the country. Our season starts in June as we prepare to qualify for camp and ends in February. It's a long season. The state competition in December is a good place for us to compete against others in the state and showcase our routines initially. After state, we continue to tweak our dances by adding harder choreography and cleaning them to perfection. Our dream as a team is to compete at the national level. Please don't take that away again.
Last year, submitting a video and watching other teams compete on screen does not give us the full experience of a true regional or national competition. On our team of 20 girls, due to COVID restrictions last school year, only 3 of us have ever been to regionals and nationals in person. To continue to compete with the best of the best, we need our teammates to experience the high level of an in-person competition that takes place at regionals and nationals. You're only as good as those you compete against. Nationals helps prepare those of us interested in collegiate dance teams to see what it takes to land a spot on a nationally acclaimed dance team such as ISU or U of I.
Regionals and nationals teach us many lessons. We come together as a team to support each other, learn to handle intense pressure, and celebrate our successes no matter where we place. We come to understand the value of hard work through fundraising throughout the year, including selling fundraising items, laboring in car washes at Hills Bank on the hottest days of summer, working in concession stands during the athletic events, and a silent auction. We do all of that and more to be able to attend nationals in particular. Please reward our very long, hard work dance and fundraising by allowing to attend UDA regional and national competitions.
We know there are many other teams and clubs across the district just like us that are also missing out on a huge life experience due to not being able to travel out of state. We decided to come to you today and help them too. Please change the policy and allow us to attend our out-of-state competitions and/or trips on behalf of all student clubs and co-curricular activities that might otherwise would miss out on a highlight of the school year. Thank you for listening to us tonight.
Thank you, ladies. I got a question for you. I have two other slips with students, Olivia and Leah, or Leah, I'm sorry. Is that this group, or do we have two other students to speak? I don't want to miss them okay. We'll go ahead and do all of our students first. So let's start with Olivia Casebolt, please.
Good evening, board members. My name is Olivia Casebolt. I am a senior at West High School. I am here tonight to address my concerns of the health and safety protocols that are restricting our out-of-state travel and how it will affect my team and I. I am a 4-year member of the West Side dance team. 2 of the 3 years, we were able to compete all the way to nationals, and we were successful in representing West and the Iowa City School District, being ranked nationally. Last year, we were unable to compete due to restrictions that were placed on sports and traveling in and out of state. I want to let you know that all of our hard work that we put into it for a full year is not to compete in state, but to have the ability to compete regionally and nationally. Personally, I have danced up to 24 hours or more a week in preparation to compete nationally. We have been very successful throughout the years, and from personal experience from my freshman and sophomore years, the feeling of that so-called finals floor is unexplainable and absolutely rewarding. We have earned that place to compete at the national level this year, so please do not take that away from us again. Last year, when we were unable to compete in person, it stole the experience and the feeling of the pride to be able to perform as a team. Not only did this affect the experience, it also affected me as a person and my motivation mentally and physically. I wasn't working towards anything, and this impacted me negatively as a dancer as well as in my studies. It stunted my growth, and I didn't have the opportunity to be challenged as a dancer competing against other nationally ranked dance teams. I know you are aware of how your decisions impact all students. Currently, your policy is allowing in-state travel for activity and events. However, there is no specific data stating that traveling out of state is a higher risk to student health than an in-state travel. I ask you to consider equality throughout all sports and club activities within your school district. As you may know, the mission of the Iowa City School District is to ensure all students will be responsible, independent leaders capable of making informed decisions, and in a democratic society as well as a dynamic global community. I feel as a student I am completely capable of making informed decisions as to whether I am comfortable with competing out of state to enhance my global experiences. I ask you to provide me with the ability to make my own informed decisions, as stated in your mission. If we are not allowed to compete again this year out of state, our school and district will not be recognized amongst top dance teams in the nation, which impacts all of us as dancers if we want to continue dance in college or at a professional level. I personally would like to participate on a college dance team out of state, and if you guys take away my opportunity to represent myself, my team, and my school, you take away my ability to be recruited onto a Division I dance team. If you strive for your students to be successful, strive for every single one of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. Leah Pascha?
Good evening, school board members. My name is Leah Pascha, and I want to thank you for the opportunity for allowing me to come before you to encourage you to reconsider your position to limit student travel to in-state only. I'm a senior member on the West High dance team and have been now for 3 years. In that 3 years, dancing has pushed me mentally and physically beyond limits I never thought I could reach. One of the biggest teaching moments comes at nationals in Florida when we compete against teams from all over the United States. It is amazing to push ourselves to new heights and succeed. These are powerful moments we cannot get in state competing with the same schools over and over. I know you think you are keeping us safe by not allowing us to travel to nationals or go out of state, but actually you are doing more harm than good. Risk to children and teens from COVID is extremely low, and there is data to show that children are less likely to become severely ill, nor are we the super spreaders the media portrays us as. I understand a year ago we didn't know what to expect, but now we know so much more. Other districts are allowing their students to travel out of state, and it is unfair that we are being held back from the same opportunity. Dance team is not the only group this ruling would affect. Groups such as debate, BPA, and band, just to name a few. Most sports end their season with the state tournament, but it seems dance is easily overlooked and brushed away. Something else I feel you are forgetting is the mental health side of this. The mental health issues and suicide rates among teens have increased 31% or more since restrictions have been put on us due to the COVID-19 pandemic and lockdowns. Our parents should be the ones to decide if it is safe for us to go, not you. By making this ruling, you are taking the power of choice away from parents and families. We cannot keep putting our lives on hold because of fear. We as a team have worked so very, very hard with countless hours of practice to earn a spot at nationals, and now you want to take that away from us. We deserve the right to compete. Nationals is more than just paying a fee to get in. You must have hard work, determination, grit, and the drive to want it, because it is not an easy journey to undertake. Personally, I want to dance post-high school on a Division I college dance team, and taking this final national experience away is extremely detrimental to me and puts me at a disadvantage when trying out against dancers who have had the opportunity to go last year and this year. The nationals environment is one that is hard to describe. It is truly magical. The feeling of competing at Disney World up against some of the best teams in the nation is an opportunity that is far and few between. Competing fuels my soul and helps me keep going when things get hard. Hearing the news last year that we were not going to be able to compete at nationals after working so hard truly crushed me. The one thought in the back of my mind was, well, at least I'm not a senior, I still have next year. Well, next year has now become this year, knowing that there is even a slim chance that I may not be able to compete at nationals with my team during my final senior year truly rips my heart to pieces. My team and I have so much potential and talent, and we deserve the right to compete up against the top teams in the nation. I know my team may seem small to you, but my team is my world. Just imagine, if you will, working all year long for hours and hours at a time to only have someone tell you you can't go. It's not very fair, is it? Especially when the decision is made out of fear or misinformation. This dance team is not just a group of girls to me, we are family. We deserve the right to show our talents and compete against the very best at nationals. Thank you for your time for listening tonight. Please take all of this into careful consideration before you make your final decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. Next up, Nora Bernard. Borner, perhaps?
Good evening, I'm Nora Bernard. I live at 911 Fairchild Street in Iowa City. I have 4 children, 3 of whom are old enough to be in the district. As the school year quickly approaches and the Delta variant grows, the reality that we live in a state that has banned all schools and institutions from requiring masks is all the more tangible, and I'm terrified. The New York Times reported Sunday on the increasing number of children and youth experiencing long COVID, and the numbers are staggering. Anywhere between 11 and 15% of youth who contract COVID will develop long-term issues. This should trigger alarm bells for all of us. Do you hear them ringing? This is an inconvenient truth we need to hear. Children are getting long-haul COVID, and we can prevent this. Some of you may know I contracted COVID in the early days of the pandemic and have been dealing with long COVID for 17 long months now. Let me tell you, it is no joke. Long COVID changed my entire life, my entire being. A once high-achieving person, I've struggled with brain fog and even forgot my own birth date on a few occasions. There have been times I feel locked in my own head, the brain fog preventing me from being who I really am and speaking how I want or how I understand and navigate the world. And I'm a 41-year-old woman with no pre-existing conditions, was in excellent health, and I have ample resilience, privilege, and access. I can't even begin to think how a young developing brain would deal with memory and cognitive function loss. they would never be the same. Everywhere I go, I carry a small bag with me which looks normal on the outside, but it functions as my mobile med bag. In addition to brain fog, fatigue, horrible headaches, body pain, and insomnia, I have heart and lung damage from COVID. I now have to carry an arsenal of emergency medicine with me everywhere I go. Every day, every moment is a calculation. What mitigation do I need to do to live my life? It's exhausting and consuming. But can you imagine a child trying to navigate this new reality? Can you imagine your child getting what seems like a cold and never being the same again? I share this with you not as a fear tactic, but to spur you to action. Our kids need to be in school together. Their mental health and education depends on it. But our governor and state legislator have made it illegal to enforce the one thing we know will keep our kids safe and in school: masks. We simply cannot have any indoor unmasked time in schools, period. Lunch together in the lunchroom, half the class unmasked. With Delta, kids are going to get COVID, and we will have many, many long hauler children and youth in our midst. It isn't a question of if, it's a reality of how many. How many kids in Iowa City will be like me? How many kids will never be the same? Even one is too many. This is preventable. I'm begging the Iowa City School District to take every legal and practical action possible to prevent transmission in our schools. Stand up to the governor. Join the other school districts in putting health and education first. This isn't partisan, this is public health. Everyone needs to wear a mask. Kids need to eat outdoors. Please, please, don't let anyone turn out like me, or worse. It's time to be brave. It's time to do more. Thank you.
Thank you, Nora. Next up, Karen Woltman.
All right, good evening. I'm Karen Woltman. I'm a parent of 3 students who participate in district band, jazz band, and orchestra programs. This will be my 9th year as a district orchestra parent and my 8th year as a district band parent. It's no secret that the last 4 trimesters have been difficult ones for students in performing music programs. It's been, by and large, all practice and no game days for the music kids for well over a year. The availability of vaccines has allowed live music events to begin to return to our community. The Iowa High School Music Association and SEBA are planning for in-person events this year, and we should be too. But the district health and safety policy as currently written seems to prohibit that. No parent volunteers at any time, even outside of school hours. No parents in the building at any time, even outside of school hours. No visitors, no access to the buildings after 8 p.m. All looks a lot like no performance music events. So as you continue your discussion of the district health and safety policy tonight, I urge you to please consider writing a separate health and safety policy for the secondary buildings and programs. A policy that recognizes the availability of vaccines for ages 12 and up. A policy that recognizes the successful implementation of risk mitigation in secondary band and orchestra rooms that allowed for in-person rehearsals last year. A policy that recognizes that having a guest clinician in to work with band or orchestra ensembles creates no more risk to the school community than having a substitute teacher in the building. A policy that recognizes that parents seated in the auditorium for a concert create no more risk for the school community than parents seated in the gym for volleyball or basketball games or wrestling meets. Finally, I ask you to please write a health and safety policy for the secondary buildings that demonstrates that you understand and care that concerts and other performance music events are as important to student musicians as game days are for student athletes. Band and orchestra directors went above and beyond last year to provide engaging and rewarding experiences for students attending in person or online, and to help them to make progress as musicians. But the programming of last year isn't a sustainable way to run a performance music program. The performances, whether for peers during fine arts days events or pep rallies, for families at concerts, for judges and clinicians at festivals are not extras. They are essential components of the performance music curriculum that help to recruit and to retain students and promote their growth and development as performing musicians. Please make the effort to create a secondary health and safety policy to allow the secondary music students to get back to performing. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Next up, Joseph Dobrian.
Joseph Dobrian, 1015 2nd Avenue. I call the board's attention to the minutes of the meeting of the Equity Advisory Committee, June 2nd, 2021. Mr. Haxton announced that a question now exists on the student registration form that asks, does your student's identity in terms of gender, preferred pronouns, or name differ from their legal status? There is a flagging process for when a parent selects that the child's gender status does not match legal gender. This then alerts the secretaries that they will need to enter protected identity information, which cannot be seen by teachers. Ms. Taylor asked, if parents are not supportive of a student's identity, can students change their names without this? Mr. Haxton replied they can't change it through the portal, but they can go to the building secretary and it can be updated from there. Ms. Pierce asked, can students protect or hide their names or pronouns from their parents? The legal name is hidden from teachers, but is there a way to hide the preferred name from parents in case they are not supportive? Mr. Haxton said he did not think there is a way to hide this from their parents, but this is something that can be looked into. Ms. Jane said, we've struggled with parent knowledge of preferred pronouns and preferred names with PowerSchool. The policy that we currently have in place is that if a student is not out at home, or if their parents are not aware of the gender identity, the student will be given the option to create a gender support plan where the school can accommodate the student's needs without making any changes to PowerSchool. Mr. Clausen is reported as saying, it is sort of like our LGBTQ policy, where the board is taking some risks where it excludes parents in many ways to protect the students. Now, this exchange invites several questions, which I ask out of a genuine desire for information. First, why should a parent or a child be indulged in his or her denial of manifest biological fact by an institution whose ostensible mission is to teach facts? Second, if a student wants to deny his or her biological sex, why should the child's parents be shielded from that information? Third, what is a gender support plan? Might it one day include medical treatment? I don't allege that it does, I merely ask. Fourth, what steps does the district propose to take if a parent finds out about a gender support plan and objects to it? Fifth, does the school district claim greater authority than the parent in the matter of a child's sexual formation? Sixth, how does the district justify these policies? I ask God's blessing on your deliberations. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen.
Thank you. Next up, Kristen Smith.
Hello, my name is Kristen Smith. I'm a parent to a Liberty High student. Thank you for your service to the students of our whole district. I can imagine it takes a lot of effort and a lot of personal time for which you're not often thanked. We appreciate your work towards developing the young people of our community. I'm asking for your attention to the field trips and student travel section of the drafted Iowa City Community School District 21-22 School Year Health and Safety Guidance Policy. It states when Johnson County is in the CDC's substantial category, then there will be a ban on elementary field trips and student out-of-state travel. If the purpose is for safety, it should apply to everyone in the district and ban travel for everyone, including staff and administration. I would advocate that travel can be carried out safely for everyone, but wanted to highlight that inconsistency in the policy. We can also all agree that a full high school experience includes participation in athletics or co-curricular clubs. These activities can elevate a student's academic achievements because of a preset academic standard to which a student must comply to stay in the club or the team. High school athletes will train hard in hopes of one day to play in the state championship. What a great and memorable accomplishment that would be. Now imagine you're a member of a national top 10 acclaimed dance team, and you've just been told no, you can't complete at your highest national level because your competition happens to be out of state. Is it really risky enough that programs and teams should give up the goals and make up the program worthwhile? Do we have any data to support the notion that out-of-state club travel is less safe than the state events and opportunities that the policy allows for our other athletic programs? If you're going to deny our students their full club experience, please provide data from reputable state and national studies or health agencies to back it up. Please be data-driven and consistent with the application of such policies, and I ask that the out-of-state travel ban be removed from the draft. Again, we appreciate your concern and safety for all the well-being of all of our students. There's nobody more concerned about the safety of the students that participate in our clubs than we as parents. We care more and do not believe any risk is increased through the limited time spent traveling out of state with these activities. We and the coaches are constantly mindful of safe participation. Please respect that as well. Parents should be afforded the choice to limit activities or not based on the health conditions and risks to their very own children. Thank you for your time, and let's make sure we're working to educate the full student physically and mentally with outstanding experiences in and out of traditional classroom walls. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. Next up, Sarah Burns.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Sarah Burns. I'm from North Liberty and the parent of 2 students in the district. My daughter is a member of the Liberty varsity dance team. First, thank you for the hours of time that you spend serving the district and the children in our communities. I understand that you're trying to do what's best, and I appreciate your service. It certainly isn't an easy job and impossible to please everyone. Nonetheless, I would like to briefly communicate to you my concerns over the policy for the 2021-22 school year that was just released via district email, specifically the ban on school field trips and out-of-state travel, banned for students only this year. I appreciate that you're trying to follow the advice of the Health and Safety Committee. However, I respectfully request that you consider weighing the advice and recommendations against other important and competing values and benefits conferred to students by out-of-state travel experiences. I appreciated when the board did exactly that last spring when you chose not to force exposed students to quarantine for 2 weeks. By opting to follow the Iowa Department of Public Health rules in quarantining students instead of the CDC and JCDPH guidelines, you prioritized the educational needs of the students. Now, I'm asking that you weigh those benefits once again and reconsider the allowing out-of-state travel to our co-curricular clubs and non-sports teams. Band, orchestra, debate, dance teams, cheer teams, and many other clubs and co-curricular activities have historically had out-of-state travel as a highlight of their year. I would like you to see that this is also important enough to outweigh any perceived risk of out-of-state travel by students participating in these activities. Some students will miss out on 3 years of out-of-state travel performances and activities if this policy is not changed. We want our kids to have their full season, like the sports teams have had, starting in June of 2020. And for us, that does include out-of-state travel. I know that a lot of you value educating and caring for the whole child, which is a fragile balance, now more than ever. And I think that we can all agree that education does not occur solely inside the district school buildings. Valuable educational, social-emotional learning, and life-enriching opportunities are being taken away from students by banning out-of-state travel. Many of our students in these clubs and activities are deeply saddened by the highlight and many times the culmination of their season being taken away. Another point that I would like to make is that banning student travel outside of the state of Iowa only reduces total travel of our Johnson County population by an extremely small amount. One might argue that the reduction is negligible at best when you consider how many families already travel out of state for Thanksgiving, Christmas, spring, summer breaks, and a variety of other occasions. I believe that parents should have the ability to make an informed choice whether their child should travel out of state for school activities. If liability is the concern, parents could sign a waiver allowing their child to travel out of the state of Iowa and commit to closely monitoring for any symptoms following their child's return to the school building, just as exposed students within our buildings do today under the new quarantine policy. I feel compelled to ask, if not this year, with everything that we've learned together about protecting each other and mitigating the risk, then when? When are we going to allow students to resume these activities? Next year, what would have changed to allow travel? To my knowledge, there is no public health entity saying don't travel. Please lift the ban on student travel outside of our state. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Next up, Terry Davies.
Hello, my name is Terry Davies. I am a parent of a Liberty High student. Thank you for your service to all the students in our district. I acknowledge that you put in endless hours of your own personal time to serve our district to the best of your ability. I am speaking tonight about the Iowa City Community School District 2021-2022 School Year Health and Safety Guidance, particularly the field trips and student travel section. As currently written, it bans all elementary field trips and out-of-state travel when Johnson County is at the substantial level or higher on the CDC COVID tracker linked in the document. Please consider the following as I ask that this part of the policy is not adopted. First, the policy is inconsistent as applies to students only and not to staff or administration traveling for district purposes. I believe it is safe for anyone to travel for the district, but if safety is the driver, then the policy should apply to all district travel. According to the CDC, transmission of COVID is not age dependent. Second, we in the district encourage students at all levels to participate in co-curricular activities, including athletics and clubs. These enhance their school experience and provide positive learning environments outside the classroom. Both athletics and clubs should receive consistent opportunities with the same purposes. Athletes in sports compete with a goal to advance as far as possible through conference and eventually state tournaments as the culmination of their season. It is rewarding to work for these goals as a team and exciting when their hopes of success and hard work pay off. Clubs, such as Liberty Dance Team, also experience working hard as a team towards rewarding goals. For them, the daily effort you see out of them in a gym can culminate in regional and national competitions that take place outside of Iowa. The policy ban would unfairly and inconsistently limit the experience and opportunities of our clubs such as dance and band when compared to other sports. The ban cuts short a lifetime of memories, developing bonds as close as family, and blood, sweat, and tears it takes to achieve a top 10 national title. All these pieces are there to mold the whole student physically and mentally. Third, and similarly, the out-of-state travel opportunities for clubs can be carried out in a way that make them as safe as any events and travel allowed for other sports and events within the state. There is no data nor basis for assuming that out-of-state travel is less safe than other activities the policy allows. Thank you for consideration to make ICCSD's students' high school experience the best they can be.
Thank you, Terry. Next up, Joe Floss.
Hi everyone, Joe Floss. I have a daughter that is a senior at West High. My topic is out-of-state travel, but first I just want to thank all the speakers before me, especially the young ladies that went before me to not only explain how long and hard they work, but also why they do what they do in regards to regional and national competitions. It's about development, and I think a lot of them who spoke here tonight took a huge step forward in their development with their peaceful, insightful public discourse here. So very brave of you. Nice job. Wanted to get right to my point, and that is that there is an alternate path that the school district can take in regards to out-of-state travel. And so this is a little bit more solution-oriented. The CDC right now is not recommending or providing guidelines that people should not leave their state. So for that reason, maybe what we could do as a proposal is we could apply those CDC guidelines during travel and while our students are at these out-of-state events, okay? So during travel and while they're there, we could apply the CDC guidelines, okay? And then when they return from their out-of-state events, we could request, before they return back to the general student population at school, that they have a negative COVID test or that they self-quarantine. That would allow our students to both travel, get the full experience of their high school years, regardless of whether it's dance or BPA, which is our Business Professionals Association. They could, again, participate in those activities. We could keep the other students safe by instituting either the policy that they test negative for COVID when they return or to quarantine. And that is my proposal. So I appreciate your time and thank you for all that you do for our community.
Thank you, Joe. Last up, Melanie Hester.
Good evening. I am Melanie Hester, an Iowa City resident and a teacher in the district. Today I am speaking as a tax-paying citizen of the Iowa City community about the House File Law 802. Living a busy life, I rarely have time to do my hair, and I promise this will all make sense. I usually wear it up in a bun, just like this, but one day last year I wore it down, straight. And when I got to my classroom, some students seemed mesmerized. They wanted to touch it, and mostly they asked questions, such as, "Dang, Miss Hester, how'd you get your hair so long?" Or, "Miss Hester, why do you have blonde hair?" And the typical question, "Miss Hester, what's your race?" And I love that question because it leads to meaningful conversations, the kind that teachers dream of. Normally, I would answer the questions by explaining that I am mixed or biracial. I would tell them that my dad is Black, African American, and my mom is white, Caucasian. But over the years, I felt that I've had to choose one race because of society. And I would continue to explain to them about the one-drop rule, the rule that was used to classify people that were enslaved. But now with the law, some people might interpret this conversation as going against parts such as, quote, "Someone by virtue of their race can be inherently racist or sexist," or, quote, "Someone by virtue of their race or sex is responsible for actions committed in the past of other members of that race," or, quote, "that some should feel psychological distress, like guilt because of their race." But given my personal experiences this past year, there will be some people who use the law to target teachers who are having these conversations in their classrooms. Now, we aren't saying that white students or any student should feel distressed. That's not the point. If they feel distress as a result of these conversations, that's a different story, and teachers would provide them tools to process that. But now all this has changed. My interpretation of the law makes me feel stifled. I will now have to walk on eggshells as a teacher of color in my own classroom. This does not make me feel safe working in this environment. I chose to go into education, yes, I love it. I am passionate about it. I'm passionate about teaching students. I have a master's in this and now over $70,000 in debt for this. And now I will be risking it all, including my teaching license. I was told that if I just stick to teaching the curriculum and the standards, then I should be fine. But as research shows and data shows, many curricular materials and standards are whitewashed, created by people with a Eurocentric lens. Place yourself in my shoes just for a moment. You're a Black woman standing in front of a classroom, mostly students of color, but you cannot be truthful about the history of systematic racism and oppression. It is imperative that we are able to talk about our history, our true history of the past, in order for us to understand the issues of today. What students will be taught in school will not match their world that they live each day. In order to rid communities of harmful stereotypes and work towards justice, students must know and understand the truth today. Therefore, they are able to be the change makers of the future. So, school board members, I would like to know how you will plan to protect teachers from those who will misinterpret and misuse this law to try to silence or restrict the conversations about race and history that happen in our classroom. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. That was our last speaker of community comments. We can move to our next agenda item and move to our ICEA update. Brady Shutt.
Thank you, President Istone, Vice President Malone, Directors, Superintendent Degner. On behalf of well, I'd first like to just thank Melanie for those comments, sincerely. And I'd also like to welcome on behalf of the Iowa State Education Association, Mr. Luke Dillon to our district. He's going to be a phenomenal leader for us, and we're really excited to have him. We probably have put you in maybe one of the toughest positions of any new administrator coming in with the work that you have to do. Just know that we're here to help in whatever you need, and welcome to the district. So, I was at Liberty this morning, and I was impressed by all of my colleagues that were coming in to do work. So I'd like to give a shout out to all of them, and then also to our operations folks. I sort of live on the teaching and learning side, but I full well know that we can't be ready for a school year if our operations people don't really do the work that they do, and it's phenomenal work. So Jeff and team, the facilities look phenomenal. Les in the business office I work with pretty closely. Thank you for everything that you do. HR I work with a lot, so Eric and Jeremy and Chris Mead does just phenomenal work with all of our contracts, and Lindsay and Carrie and Adam and company, maybe the hardest or second hardest with Luke job this year in terms of the turnover with all of our technology and Infinite Campus. So Adam and your team, just phenomenal. And I would say on behalf of the teachers, our promises are that less we won't spend any more money than what we're supposed to. And Eric will know all of the rules and we'll follow them, with fidelity. Adam, we won't break any new technology. And Jeff will leave the facilities as good as we can, at least until the kids get there. So that's sort of our promise. So thank you all very much. And I would like to say on behalf of the teachers to the parents, I know there's a lot of concern, rightfully so, about the opening of the school year. And I just want all of the families and guardians and parents that might be watching to know that the teachers are incredibly excited to have the kids come back into our classrooms. We're going to welcome them, we're going to love them and challenge them, and we're going to help them grow. And our guarantee is we'll do everything we absolutely can to have an amazing school year. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Brady. Next up, just approval of tonight's agenda. So I would entertain a motion.
I move that we approve tonight's agenda.
Second. Kim?
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
All right, thank you, Kim. Next up is our consent agenda. Were there any questions from directors after reviewing the bills?
I reviewed the bills this session and I didn't have any questions.
All right. Anything else? No? Are there any items directors would like to pull from the consent agenda? All right. If not, I would entertain a motion to approve consent.
I move we approve the consent agenda.
Second.
All right, Kim?
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
Mine is showing up with an item withdrawn from consent. Is that a carryover from the last agenda? Am I the only one that sees that?
I have it on mine too, Sean.
I think it's a,
That's supposed to be in the public hearing.
it should be in the public hearing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so next item is a public hearing, and so we'll go to it. It's just in the wrong place on the agenda. So we will open up the public hearing. Vice President Malone.
Now is the time and place for the public hearing on the district's proposed grant of an underground electric utility easement at Penn Elementary with legal descriptions provided in the attached documentation to the Interstate Power and Light Company and Quest Corporation. Notice of the public hearing was published in the Iowa City Press Citizen on July 28, 2021. Are there any questions from the board? Are there any questions from the public?
All right, we can close this public hearing. Thank you, Director Malone. Next up is our presentation on our quarterly financial report. Are we kicking it right to Les, or did you want to lead us off, Matt or Chase? Right to Les? All right.
Thank you, directors. This is the fourth quarter report, but it is not the final report for the fiscal year ending June 30th of 2021. It is based upon a cash basis, so there will be the year-end adjustments that we have every single year. And so while we do have a positive and growing unspent balance, I can't say it's going to grow that much when we have the final adjustments made. It's an extremely tricky year with school going until June 11th. That pushes back some of those purchases into the end of the year and kind of wraps around into July. And you also have all of the ESSER activities that have been taking place that conflict this that we don't have in a normal year. And so I just caution you that while it's good numbers now, I'm not saying it's going to be bad numbers. I'm just saying that they are likely to change because of those two time-sensitive type things. The ESSER funding has been accounted for to the best of our abilities with the estimates that we have in place, both on the revenue side and the projected expenditures, with separate lines represented in the unspent balance page. So, bear with us. Matt's going to talk about it a little later in some of our activities there. We've projected all of those things into the document as we currently have to the best of our abilities. And there's just two things on the revenue side, while they're not big pieces of our overall revenue in the state and the federal, is the impact that the last year and a half has had on interest income and on our Medicaid. Obviously, Medicaid is serving students when they're actually in the building. And so because of the reduced number of students in our buildings over the last 15 months, our revenue is down this year, and that will impact our special ed deficit going forward. It's not a reflection of bad activities, it's just not being able to do the same activities that we normally would with our Medicaid revenues. And the other one is interest income. Prior to 2019, the district was able to earn about $600,000 per year. That equates to about the cost or amount that would fund somewhere between 6 and 7 teachers. This last year, we're under $20,000 because interest rates are virtually non-existent. Doesn't mean we have less money on deposit. It just means that there's no interest being paid. And so, again, that $600,000, like I said, does some funding. So there's a couple things that, while they're not huge, those little things do challenge us on a day-to-day as we make these decisions. So with that, I'll entertain any questions.
Directors?
No questions. I'll just comment once again. I appreciate the report and the thoroughness of it. And a lot of the stuff that I think we inherited from Craig that we still keep going with, the color coding, comparing us to other districts. It's really helpful. It really helps a board member look through this, and I do appreciate the work.
So I guess I'll jump in then. I know, for a few years now, right, we talked about how our unspent balance was getting smaller, and we knew we were kind of in a tight spot with the opening of Liberty and some other things going on. And so I'm glad to see us climbing back out of there. Right? It's getting us back to a level where we were, right? It's not like all of a sudden we have giant piles of cash, but it's getting us back to the level we were. I am concerned about how it starts to go back down again in future years. Is the intent there that we're going to be recovering by increased enrollment over the next few years to make up some of those future year deficits, right? Because we have the ESSER funds now that make it look prettier than it would have. Without that, is that what we're banking on, right? Is increased enrollment to help?
We have not changed the projections for the enrollment or the state aid from previous quarters because it's such a huge unknown. We don't know if the 286 students that we lost on last year's certified enrollment will show up on August 23rd and be here on October 1st when we have to make the official count. If they do, plus our normal growth of around 200 average students per year, this picture changes significantly, Sean, to your point about growing that unspent balance or at least maintaining it in those future years. So it's projected based upon those estimates because we don't have better information. As soon as that becomes available, we'll put it into the model, and that will impact our decision making as we move forward and our discussions, to your point.
Yeah, okay, I appreciate that because it looks rosy for a little bit and then right back to looking kind of ugly. And I guess I wanted that lifeline to hold on to, right? That's the positive there. So,
Les, what is that day in October that we close our count to certify?
October 1st is the official count date.
Thanks.
But it doesn't get resolved in probably early November by the time the school districts in the state review all of the numbers. So.
Any other questions on this report, directors?
I don't have a question, maybe a comment, just because we've been running this unspent balance ratio way below kind of what our board policy states. I don't know if there's ever a time when we want to have a discussion about changing that policy or I mean, it's quite different, and there's nothing saying we have, I think it's between 5 and 10%, but we've been well under 5% for a long time. So I don't know if it's worth a discussion, or coming up with some plan that shows us getting up into, getting to what our policy is. Personally, I'd be open to that discussion. I think we've been operating really well with our current numbers, with our unspent balance under 5%. We've been able to pull it off, I think, because of all the good work everybody does to run a tight ship. But I just want to bring that up because we are kind of floating around with a policy that says 5 to 10% with no realistic expectation that we're going to get there anytime soon.
That would be a valid discussion to have.
Yeah, I think the discussion is fine to have. It's my understanding that unspent balances for districts policy mainly reflect the state agencies and state boards' recommendations about levels of unspent balances. So maybe we could have, if we have a discussion about it, maybe we could have a discussion about where those policies came from historically, if they make sense now or not.
Sorry, I'm trying to get the microphone on here. We could certainly have that conversation. I think that policy is rooted in some best practice for districts. Like JP said, though, we have some evidence of being able to operate, continually at a different rate. And so I think we would just want to, like I think Charlie's trying to anchor back to, here's some solid information about, okay, why is, a best practice indicator between 5 and 10%? Do we have a realistic plan to get to 5% and get out of that for a period of time? Les talked about a few things that will be contingent upon that, right? I mean, positive enrollment growth, our ability to control expenditures. We're going to talk ESSER funds later. There's going to be a big lift here for us the next 2-3 years to watch some position control piece where we have a lot of influx of cash into the district, a lot of positions, and then monitoring our workout plan, from that. And so it's probably a timely conversation that we continue to keep our eye on that ball as we work through that process in particular.
Anything else? All right, let's go ahead and move on into our discussion items section. And the first one up is the 2021-2022 school year. Matt?
Sure, thank you. So there's a few attachments that you have here this evening. And we're going to really start with the health and safety component. And actually, would you mind pulling it up, Chase? Thank you. And so on the health and safety guidance, you're familiar with seeing that document from last week. We've changed the color coding portion to all of it just being in the gray or the black text there now, as we have moved into the substantial category as we anticipated we would after we met last week. The additional part you see there is the quarantine recommendations from the different organizations, from the CDC to the Iowa Department of Public Health and Johnson County Public Health. You're going to see great alignment between Johnson County Public Health and the CDC recommendations. And so really, in summary, from that conversation we had last week around quarantines, it would still be the admin team's recommendations that if we were going to explore a quarantine policy, that we would anchor to one of those. And most likely after that conversation and hearing some of the concerns around the unmasked piece, we would suggest the Johnson County Public Health and CDC recommendations surrounding that if we're going to pursue a quarantine protocol there. We can work through any conversation that you want to have around that this evening and try to answer some questions. We know there's a lot of words on a page there, and it's taken us a while to craft that and put it together too. The other thing I would just note from the onset on this part of the conversation is just an awareness and preparedness that we may lose the ability to do so, depending on, just as the pandemic's progressed and we see activities from the state level, if that's what we commit to, or that's what this district decides to do, or our district decides to do, just some recognition that we may or may not be allowed to continue to do that from the powers that be. So I just think we should go into that eyes wide open. But it is one of the last tools that we have left that we talked about last week. We know we can't require masks. We're going to encourage the heck out of those and ask people to wear them consistently and really try to encourage the mask use. But quarantine was one of those last things that we had left. Social distancing will be difficult for us. We don't have 40% of our kids in an online program this year, and so that was kind of the genesis of a lot of our conversation, I think, last week, and why we brought you this document tonight. So with that, I think we'd take any questions or open it up for any conversation you wanted to have around the health and safety guidance and see where we can position ourselves to be most successful.
I'll throw it out there to whoever wants to start. Charlie? Go for it.
Just wanted to ask for some comment about the JCPH recommendation on quarantines for unvaccinated individuals. Their first guidance is mask use by unvaccinated persons will be considered when determining guidance. Can you?
Yeah, so I'll open it up, and then any team members, as they have additions that they'd want to add. We do have Jess here with us tonight. The piece around the mask use by unvaccinated persons will be considered when determining guidance. If you go to the CDC site and click on close contact and how that's identified, it talks about a K12 exception for when both students are masked. The potential issue we have with that, without being able to require masks, is there's some likelihood that one of the persons will not be masked at that time. And so that's why there's conversation there about what that quarantine would be. It's hard to say, not knowing the situation around would both students be masked potentially, would one of them be unmasked, and then which one is it? Was it the infected person that's masked and the close contact was unmasked? All of those different scenarios. So each scenario is a little bit different as we get into it, Charlie, and so that's why I think that one was difficult to spell out. But that's where they're trying to create some space to deal with that exception.
Could you say who will be making those decisions?
So we actually have continued to contact trace with the help of our nursing staff as we work through that process and worked in collaboration with Johnson County Public Health. We have had the conversation with them that they would make those contact tracing calls home. to parents this school year, which would be different from how we handled that last year, where that was our staff and our nurses taking a lot of time to make those phone calls and deliver that news, which also created some obviously very difficult situations for our staff at times too. So again, we're super thankful for their partnership as it went along, but they would assume the responsibility of making those phone calls home this year.
Sean, I have another question, but I could hold off until other people have talked to.
All right, go ahead.
So in thinking about what I view my obligation is providing protection for all students in the district, no matter what their choices are. Do you think I'm right in thinking that quarantining is a way of protecting students who are either masked or unmasked from spreading or contracting the virus? Is that a fair assessment or statement?
Yeah, I'd ask Jess to add on this if she'd like to, but the point of quarantining is to really help mitigate the spread of the virus, right? That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to slow down the spread of potential contagions in the building, contagious folks, and really slow down the spread of it. And so those, again, identified as close contacts, that's why you would ask them to quarantine, because you'd have some likelihood to believe that they would now be contagious or possess the virus. And so that would be the reason behind the quarantine measure, Charlie.
Okay, thanks, Sean.
I have a question about quarantining. Are we looking at the gold standard, 14-day? Are we looking for the shortened version? I mean, because the Johnson County kind of calls out distinctions there.
Yeah, so they recommend the 14-day quarantine as the gold standard, like it says the Johnson County component does. If you drill down to, again, some of the different details there, 7 to 10-day quarantine is an option if full quarantine is not feasible, and then we would talk about those other instances. So I think that's part of the conversation we could have around that if we wanted to pursue some of those different instances and look at those. Of course, the 14-day is the best, but if we're trying to get kids back to learning and we wanted to try to say, 7-day quarantine requires the negative test, the 5 days after, we could work through those scenarios. I know it's kind of a non-answer, Janet, but I mean, I think essentially we could look at either approach.
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm worried about everything, spreading of the virus, trying to manage it and stop the spread. But I'm also worried about students who are quarantining at home for up to 14 days who are not necessarily going to have instruction, may not have supervision. I mean, just all of the issues that come with students, especially elementary students, being at home for that period of time, with the potential of having to do it multiple times too. And so trying to balance health and safety with academic learning and social emotional health. I mean, this is the tough question that we have to be talking about tonight.
Just going off of that, so could it be a scenario where, because I assume we can't require people to show us a test. Like, I just assume that's not something we could just say, you have to show us a negative test, or can we?
We can, yeah. We can ask for a negative test to return. You can ask for a negative test to return back sooner than the stated quarantine period. So we would be okay to do that.
Because that I feel a lot better, because I do worry about this, especially we know as much as we're going to encourage masks, we can't require it. And so we're going to have more unmasked students. And so, but then I worry about these, are we going to have these multiple 14-day quarantines? And especially when you hit, some of our classes that got hit 2-3 times, in a very short amount of time. I mean, I'd like to see that, if we can shorten those quarantines by getting negative tests back. And I think most of our families would probably be happy to do that. And that would, probably be my, trying to balance that out, going from the gold standard just to see that we do require those negative tests, just to reduce as many quarantines as we can, or as, have as few days kids in quarantine. And on that, and I know this is a challenge, but do we have any plans to kind of support kids who are out on quarantine in some way to kind of keep them engaged with curriculum?
Yeah, I'm going to come back to one kind of point of Janet's and then come back to how to engage them. And so when you look at those 7 to 10-day components there, the only thing I would probably caution us against, or at least I think we should entertain as part of the conversation, is what it requires, right? Then they talk about coming back requiring social distancing, masking, and symptom monitoring, and we know that our ability to do that is somewhat limited, right? So is it as an effective of a quarantine if we know we're limited in our ability to require masks, we're limited in our ability to social distance, and so while we'd be trying to get them back in sooner, you wouldn't necessarily be meeting their potential standard on that in the truest sense of the form. So just that one, just for a note as we entertain this conversation. The other one, I would say, yes, JP, we know we have to continue to engage in that conversation. Brady and I have talked several times this week. Our academic team's working through what some potential solutions like that would look like. It's going to be nowhere near a full day of instruction, but we know that total asynchronous learning is not great for our kids either during that period of time. And so we're trying to work through what those options would look like if we would move forward with the quarantine process so that we could engage our students at home. Again, it's not going to be as good as being in the school building and that, but we would need to work collaboratively with our Teachers Association to make sure we could pull that off.
Could we run through some examples so that I can understand how the quarantine policy would play out in practice? Like, for example, I'm a high school student who is fully vaccinated, and I come with, I'm exposed to a close contact. My understanding is I don't have to quarantine. Is that correct?
Okay, Jess, I'm not going to go it alone on this one, so.
I know, maybe I should look at Jess.
There it goes, thank you. Right, so if they're fully vaccinated, they would not need to quarantine as long as they're asymptomatic. Now, if they start displaying symptoms, and keep in mind, COVID-related symptoms are runny nose and a sore throat, and so those are things that really take nursing assessment with it. Do they have allergies? Do they have asthma? Do they have a chronic cough that is there all winter long? Those are things that the nurses are working through on each individual case.
But so it sounds like our secondary students, who should, for the most part, all be able to be eligible to be fully vaccinated, could avoid a lot of potential quarantine by going and getting fully vaccinated.
As long as they don't become symptomatic, yes.
As long as
correct.
they don't become symptomatic. Right. And that has really nothing to do with whether somebody has a mask on or doesn't have a mask on. That's
about getting
centered
vaccinated.
around the vaccinated.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. So now I'm a third grade student. I obviously can't get vaccinated.
Nope.
If I have a mask on, but there's a COVID positive student in my classroom who doesn't have a mask, that whole classroom is going to get quarantined. Is that correct?
Well, that is a Johnson County guidance specific. That's not a CDC guidance. The CDC guidance states that the 3 to 6 feet. If they're within 6 feet of a positive case, then that's considered a close contact. That was a Johnson County guidance. The 2 hours in a classroom together.
Okay, so we may be able to avoid quarantining entire classrooms, even though we can't enforce masks.
Right, and Johnson
Jess,
County.
I was going to say, would you maybe explain why behind some of that 2 hours with the?
Right, Johnson County really felt that it was a prolonged exposure in a classroom, and you have younger kids, and they're not always good mask wearers. They're chewing on it, and we're talking kindergartners and first graders and stuff. So they just felt that 2 hour was a prolonged exposure. Now, last year they were willing to work with us with that. If we felt that we wanted to stick with the close contact definition according to the CDC, they were willing to work with us with that, and I'm sure they would again this year if we, decide to follow the Johnson County protocol, but state that we really want to follow the close contact definition of the CDC. I'm sure they would be willing to work with us.
And if we chose to follow CDC guidance, then we'd only be looking at the students within 3 feet of the COVID positive student?
Correct. Well, it's kind of tricky because they still define close contact as 6 feet, 6 feet for 15 minutes. But then they say that schools can have students within 3 feet of each other. So the definition of a close contact still did not change, though. They're just saying we can put students and recommend, within 3 feet of each other.
But the CDC provides an exception.
Okay.
And so if you see it up there in the pink, when we're talking about this, that third bullet in the pink, right? That's from the CDC, and this is what Jess is kind of talking about, why it gets complicated and there's not one rule, because there, for the folks that it might be too small in the back, that in the K-12 indoor classroom setting, close contact definition excludes students who are within 3 to 6 feet of an infected student if both the infected student and the exposed students correctly and consistently wore a mask. And so there are these other layers that I think we cut off the end of that sentence, but I think that's what it says, or it might be on the next page.
Yeah.
But that's one of those other elements where there are well-fitting masks the entire time. And so there are the rules, and there's these caveats that are layered on top of both the CDC and where Johnson County tells us they're aligned with the CDC, but then we don't actually have that caveat from Johnson County. And so while they're aligned, there are still some nuanced differences between Johnson County and the CDC.
So then the last scenario, I'm still in 3rd grade, and if we're under CDC guidance, if we're in a classroom where all of the students come and wear masks, if one of them does get COVID, then in theory, no one else in that room has to quarantine unless they start showing symptoms?
If everybody's wearing masks consistently and correctly, then yes, then the potential is that they may not have to. Are you talking Johnson County Public Health or CDC?
CDC.
CDC. Yeah, as long as they're all consistently and correctly wearing masks. And that's the challenge, is last year when we did follow the Iowa Department of Public Health guidelines, we would talk to teachers, they've got a lot to do in a classroom, and then we'd say what students were wearing their masks consistently and correctly, and they sometimes could tell us, many times couldn't tell us, if they were wearing their masks all day long, consistently and correctly. So that's a challenging piece to figure out when you're doing the contact tracing.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, the CDC, again, on their website has a specific K-12 exception for both students being masked, being able to stay in the K-12 school for that component. So if you click on the close contact portion of that, that'll pull right up to show it. I think Jess was differentiating there between Johnson County and CDC, because Johnson County, again, wouldn't necessarily have that, or would look at maybe some of that length, even if they were both masked, on how to do that. So like Chase had just explained, there are some careful nuances to that. The other thing I just entertained for your thinking is, last time we talked about trial periods, and so, even some of the community commenters tonight, and thank you to our students that did come and talk and gave those impassioned pleas, and I know that takes a lot of courage, and I think there was a father, Mr. Floss, back there, who talked about your own development with that tonight, and that's a huge step, and so thank you for sharing that perspective with us. And I just lost my train of thought there a little bit, trying to build those guys up. But when we think about where we go with this and try to develop what kind of quarantine process we really want to have, I apologize. I totally blanked on where I was going with that statement. You remind me?
Test cases.
Oh, the trial period, sure. And so I was relating that to the travel around the impact of these decisions could look completely different in January, February. There's nothing that says because we start the period of time with the quarantine process, if things either go poorly for us 2 or 3 weeks in and we have more kids quarantined than we really feel comfortable about, we still can reserve the right to change course. And that can mean we start in one place and pull back to another. It can mean we start more aggressively with quarantines and pull back if we feel like the spread isn't happening as much. But nothing has to lock us in for that period of time. And so I think that's just an important thing for us to consider, is that you're not making a decision for the whole school year.
Yeah, and just like last week, we talked about moderate, now we're in substantial, the next one up is high. I mean, different protocols based on where we are in terms of community transmissions, another factor to consider.
Correct.
But, I mean, for me, the strong message is, I know we can't require masks, but this is a plea. If you do not want your child to be quarantined, have your child wear a mask at school, at all times. Properly wear a mask. That is the best way to ensure your kid is going to get the best education in the middle of this pandemic, period.
Or get vaccinated.
Or get vaccinated if you're eligible. I was thinking elementary kids. Yep, thank you.
I'll say, I don't think we can start the school year with no quarantine policy. I totally agree with what you're saying, Matt, which is we should remain flexible and adaptable and be willing to be open-minded about shifts in policy as we move through transmission levels and as we see how things are playing out in the district. I think, to our credit, that's what we've done. We did that last spring when we revisited the quarantine policy, and so I think that we've done in the past, we should keep doing it. I just think where I'm heading is I'd like to see us start off erring on the side of caution and a more aggressive quarantine policy, because it seems that's the safest thing to do, and see what happens, and see what other schools in Iowa who may not have that type of policy experience as well. You know, if Cedar Rapids has a less aggressive quarantine policy and they are not having problems, and we're seeing a lot of kids quarantined, I think that's a reason to revisit. But you know, without that data, it seems a little bit reckless to go easy on quarantine as we start school. And so I think CDC is what I'd like to kind of tie our rope to. Looking at the three, I really appreciate the three options. Jess, I don't know if you did this chart. If you did, thank you so much. I'm such a chart person, and it's color coded. It's like, you get me. But that's kind of where my head is at. And then, like Janet said, I'm optimistic that our secondary students can avoid quarantine by getting fully vaccinated. And so, like I said last week, when we were considering a slightly different quarantine and masking would keep you out of quarantine, like, that is in your power to avoid a quarantine. Go get vaccinated. Our younger kids may not be able to avoid quarantine depending on the choices that the other parents are making, sending their kids in, but I would reiterate Janet's plea is please wear a mask. It's going to be for all of the students in your class. The longer you guys can stay in class and be in front of a teacher and avoid quarantine, the better outcomes we're going to see. And I just hope that the parents would make that decision.
Yeah, I have a feeling, that the folks who care the most are probably doing that, and I think that the teams and that folks who want to participate are, and we may be preaching to the choir talking to those folks, but just walking around town in Hy-Vee and Walmart, people are not taking this as seriously as they were last year. And so that, I think, is the public plea, for all of us. If we want our kids in school participating in activities, is to just encourage this mask wearing. And frankly, I'm quite tired of folks who aren't getting vaccinated and wearing masks, because they are prolonging this. And it is their fault. They are guilty of that. And they should stop and wear a mask and get vaccinated if you can, because don't you want this to end? And that's just my public plea to folks. Please start wearing a mask indoors. Please get vaccinated, because we need kids in school. We need kids participating in these events. These kids shouldn't be missing these events because of irresponsible adults. And so I'm just fed up with those folks, and I just take this moment to express that publicly.
Well, President Eystone, last week, you pointed out, and sorry to jump in again before maybe some of the rest of you had to talk, and I think it matches what Director Williams was saying. I think we've approached this pandemic throughout that knowing the consequences of doing too little be very apparent to us. And instead, we've taken a more measured approach, I think, at every step of the way, and tried to, just live with the knowledge that if what we do works, it will be protecting kids, and that evidence won't be as apparent, but people will stay more healthy and more safe throughout it. And so it would seem contradictory for us as a school district, as we've approached this whole thing, to just take the wait and see approach, right, and see what happens. And so as we've dug into this and tried to look at it, this seems like a tool we have left, a most measured approach we can look, and again, kind of reserving that right after a period of time to say, what's the lay of the land right now? What's the situation? How many kids are being quarantined from school? What's the infection rate? And then making informed decisions as we move through the year.
You just used the exact word that I was going to use, Matt, because I was like, we can say we encourage vaccinations and we encourage mask use, and then on the other hand, we can say, but we can't require it of anybody. So the tool we have is, if you're not doing one of those two things, quarantine is in your future, right? It may be a cudgel as a tool, but that's the tool that we have. I'm trying to really understand the differences between the CDC and Johnson County guidelines, because it's clear as mud looking at it. But it seems to me that the Johnson County guidelines as they stand now, more match what we were doing in the spring when we moved to the Iowa guidelines, because they did have consider the mask use, right, when it came into quarantine. And it has it on there that it's mask use by unvaccinated will be considered. So what that means, will be considered, it's not super clear to me. But it does have the guidelines of what to do if you're vaccinated, if you put mask use in there. I mean, those are the things that we're trying to get. So I'm trying to figure out, what are the pros and cons between those two? I'm really not, like, even in the CDC one, when it comes down to the shortened quarantine, it's like, use your local public health people to help you decide. So they're kicking it back anyway. So I'm not super clear on what the difference is. But I think the idea tonight, and correct me if I'm wrong, Matt and team, is that we need to land on one, right? To figure out how we're at least going to start our year. So I would like to get us to kind of land on one. And we're just talking the quarantine policy right now, because there's a whole lot more going on there. So I guess I'm trying to figure out what's the difference between, what motivation would someone have to be more diligent in masking or getting vaccinated between the two? Maybe that's the best way to put it. Because to me, it seems like it's the same, I don't know, need to do it. Am I missing something?
I'll let Chase or Jess comment here too, but, and it may be an oversimplification to state this way, but I think what you pointed out there around the CDC guidance is there's some room for interpretation, and then your local public health department steps in to try to interpret that. We know as Johnson County's interpreted that, you see some of those nuanced differences communicated in the doc, right? And so the thing that we also know from working with Johnson County Public Health, they'll support us through that process. If there's some potential things that we want to try to work through or that we want to have questions about, I think they would continue that conversation with us if there's part of that we don't like. But as far as those nuanced differences, Jess, I don't know, is there anything you'd want to communicate specifically about the differences between the two?
And when you talk to Johnson County Public Health, they'll tell you that they really develop their guidelines based on CDC recommendations. So you'll, and Matt said it really well, that they really, it's just their interpretation of the CDC guidance and putting it in their own words and distributing it to the school districts in the county. So they really do align really closely with what the CDC has.
Okay.
So following up a little bit on what Lisa and JP have said, I agree that starting the year anyway with a firm quarantine policy is a reasonable step to take. And while I support JP's irritation or unbelief about what adults in the community are doing, I would really, my preference for us as a school district is to recognize that for elementary kids who don't have a vaccination option right now, is that whether they're masked or unmasked, we still have to protect their health as much as we possibly can. And how we communicate that to them, or how their teachers communicate that preference on our part to them, I think will, I anticipate that their teachers are going to follow that perspective that we're asking you to do, or we're going to, to try to give you as much information as you can, depending on your age level, about why wearing a mask or not wearing a mask, what that implies. But we're going to support you in whatever your parents want you to do.
I don't want to, I'm sorry, Drum, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just, if it's about this, you can go ahead, because my question has nothing to do with it.
Well, I'm a little worried that my question will go off a little bit on a tangent. It's related, but I'm afraid it'll take us off course, so go ahead.
That's fine. I was just, I don't know if I missed this, but I was just wondering why it's impossible, or why students are not allowed to Zoom in if they're quarantining.
I think it becomes a difficult scenario to ask of our staff, is really part of that. And so the staff is responsible to the students in front of them. And if we have students at home that are trying to Zoom in at the same time, trying to give their attention to those students in the classroom in front of them becomes a really difficult scenario while they're also trying to manage the instruction at home. I think when you think about it from a secondary perspective, sometimes it's a little easier to think about how that could work effectively. But for elementary age kids, we know that task for a teacher is different, right, with the students in front of them. And so that's why I said we still need to work with the association on what those avenues would look like. We do have teachers assigned at the buildings that complete different roles for us that may be able to provide some of that direct check-in with the students that would be quarantined and work through some of that process where they could Zoom and have some contact with a staff member at the building to do that. But I think that's just something we've been hesitant to really put on our teachers to do both, to try to be teaching two classrooms at once, essentially the kids in front of them and then a classroom of students out in Zoom.
So forgive me for asking a follow-up. So what about students who already are online?
And that would be a potential of something we could continue to talk about, but I know as our online program requests have continued to come in, and kind of as I said in Jess last week with Luke, that we're trying to balance getting that program up and running. You know, we would entertain the conversation around would some of the students that are quarantined be able to jump into an online section for a period of time. Those are all the different types of things that we'll need to continue to work through to see what would be best for those students to be able to join that. Pacing could become a problem with that if you have an online section that is handled at a different pace than maybe a second grade section online, a second grade section in school. We'd like to think they're of the relatively same pace, but that could be a potential issue to jump into one of those online sections. But I would say those things are on the table as we work on this the next couple of weeks for what makes the most sense.
So the other question I had, and I think we can keep it on this topic for a little bit, because I'll go back to Director Williams with the example of the third grade classroom. They're all wearing masks, they're doing great, except they're taking them all off at lunch. So does that just then negate the idea of everybody's wearing masks so nobody's quarantining in that classroom, or how are we handling that?
Yeah, that's part of the contact tracing investigation process, is where were they having lunch? Who did they sit by? Were they 6 feet apart? Those are all questions that we ask during the contact tracing process. So yes, there usually are lunchtime exposures, because their masks are off.
Okay, so
Which would be, whether it's CDC or
Right.
Johnson County, it would be for both sides. It would affect
Right.
those
So
students. the
I did
same.
jump to the other document, and I'm looking at it, and it says eating in classroom cohorts. How's that defined? So we're potentially limiting it to a table of like 5 kids instead of the whole class, or what does that look like?
So one of the things we're trying to focus more on this year rather than last year is not using such a broad brush. And so working with the schools individually about how they can maximize the space inside their buildings, especially when it comes to things like lunch. And so Sean, that question's hard to answer because it could look different in certain schools. We've talked about some schools that might use their classrooms. We've talked about other schools that have broad corridors next to their lunchroom where they might put additional tables out in the corridor so they can get additional spacing. But when we talk about that cohorting, except where there's health concerns for like our allergy tables, but that your class would eat cohorts. And so the classes would be at tables with only students from that class, and that those tables would be at least 6 feet from tables that contain students from other classes. And so trying to not only make sure we cohort at the lunch tables, spread the tables 6 feet apart, but also try to maximize usable distance inside the school to make sure that we can gain that distance. And again, it's not a blanket statement. We're going to say every school is going to do it this way. We're trying to be able to utilize the layout of the different buildings, the different cafeterias, the staff resources we have in terms of oversight for lunch as we look at how we maximize that distance during lunch periods.
So is that, as you've worked with the different schools, is the kind of the guidance put out there to the schools to kind of work this out, given the guidance of the intent is to minimize the risk of exposure and then therefore quarantines and everything that goes along with it, to have that frame as they're working on, do we eat in a classroom or in a corridor, all that stuff? Is that the information being put out there is there, that's
Yes,
being
I mean,
decided?
we met with admin council yesterday, and we knew we were gonna have this discussion on quarantine, and so they're asking us questions about what they should do, setups, and, you know, we know that the quarantine piece plays into that, and so we need to go back out to them with that information. But it does play into it as well as looking at how do we maximize distance. Eating in the classrooms last year when we were on the hybrid model looked a lot different when you had 13 kids in a classroom than when you have 26. And so while there's this perception out there that eating in the classrooms might actually be safer, that actually might have the kids closer together than if we're able to spread them out in a cafeteria and then gymnasium and using different corridors. And so those are the type of things that we're working through. But there might be other buildings where the class cohort is small. And so that does provide that opportunity. But yes, trying to look at keeping kids in class, as Janet and I think Lisa both said, as much as possible. So this eye on how do we keep students from having to be quarantined is the goal, because our teachers and our principals want our kids in school as much as their parents do.
Yeah. So I kind of misspoke earlier when I said, you know, we have vaccines and we have masks as our only thing. I think our procedures and policies are the other piece to that, right? So we have to be pretty intentional there.
So just while we're on lunch, I appreciate the one-size-fit-all approach is what we are not doing this year, because I do think, you know, you have Lincoln or Shemmick, and they have a very different building footprint than Van Allen or Grant. Are you going to ask or require that the building principals submit actual plans by a certain date so that we know that we are ready for August 23rd?
No, I mean, we hadn't done that. We trust our principals and their guidance and their decision-making. And of course, Allison, Jeff, Jess, Kate, myself, I mean, the whole team, Amy, we're ready to go out and work with them and look at their spaces. But we trust that our principals, you know, understand the guidance, are going to work with us to make the best decisions for their buildings. We don't feel like that we need to go to that level of saying, hey, you need to submit your plan to us.
I would just mention that I think that there are some parents that are very curious or anxious to know what lunch will look like so that they can think about talking to their kids about what to do during lunch. And so I get that we don't maybe need to be such micromanagers as to say a formal plan, but I think if those building principals can communicate with their parents once they know what it's going to look like so that parents can be better prepared, that's a really important piece of this. I think parents are rightfully mostly concerned about exposure at lunch because that's, I mean, you can't wear masks.
Where they're going to take their mask off.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in. I'm fine with following a more stricter quarantine policy, especially for, I don't know, the first month, 6 weeks, knowing that our community is about to triple, quadruple with an influx of students from everywhere. And oftentimes we hear that, oh, they're University of Iowa students, they don't impact or, you know, touch our community of students, and that's not true. I mean, we still have families going to the grocery store, going out to eat. And my major concern is that we will see some of that impact our kids, because we have college kids who babysit kids, and then they come to school. So I want to make sure, though, that whatever policy we're following, like Director Williams brought up, that we look at the data of some of the other districts, especially Cedar Rapids, but also Cedar Falls, who has a similar situation that we are encountering where you're in a college town. Because I think we have to take that into account, regardless of what policy we follow, to see what type of impact that could be having, or maybe it's not. But also making sure we're tracking how many times we're pulling kids out of the educational setting and quarantining them. We've heard from families last school year that their kids were out 3-4 times back to back. And that's not going to serve anybody well, especially since we can't, or we might not be able to offer some type of educational support during that time. So whatever policy as far as quarantining, we have to commit to bringing this up at every meeting, reviewing the data as quickly as we can to make sure that we're doing everything to support all of our kids and the whole well-being of our kids.
All right, so back to landing on something. It was, and I really apologize if I missed it through all of this. Was there a specific recommendation, Matt, from you and the team on one of these or another that we should try and align to that you wanted to give?
I think if you guys are supportive of the concept of the quarantines, what we'd really try to do is continue to work with Johnson County Public Health through the CDC lens and try to look at that. Now, there may be some adjustments, some tweaks that we continue to make over the next couple weeks, but we know that their plan is intended to fill in the blank spaces in the CDC's plan and give us some additional details. And I feel like we could have a collaborative conversation if there's something in their guidance that we need to think through, if that works best for us. That we can still anchor then to them as a public health organization and to the CDC. And so if you're comfortable with the framework, we would walk out of here saying we know that we need to work through the lens of Johnson County Public Health and CDC and make sure they're supportive of the quarantine practice we use. And then the specifics, of course, we would put out to our families and share there. But it would be built definitely off of those and very close to those. I'm just seeing, as we've continued to look at this today, there's a few things I think we'd still like to have conversation with them around about how we would handle those situations if they were presented to us, especially when you look at, like Janet's original question around the 7 to 10 day part. But I don't want to say that's the way it's going to be tonight without having some additional conversation with them around that aspect, so that we don't promise something we can't fulfill.
You know, the other thing I really appreciate hearing is the flexibility and not taking one size fits all. Like, I think we have to have a guideline, but then we also probably need to be more mindful if we have a situation where one class is quarantined 3 times in 2 months. We might have to step outside of our box and think a little bit whether that's, coming up with sort of another way to serve them somehow, because that's where I get concerned, is that, we can have our health guidance, and that's very important. But if we start to see some of our kids' educational experience dip dramatically below others, what could we do to fill in that gap, for those kids particularly? Because, we definitely had some situations last year where it was like some kids missed, a quarter of their year or a quarter of a trimester, say, because of our quarantine guidelines. And this year, knowing that, kind of moving into it and stepping out of our, one size fits all and being more flexible, just being mindful of that if we see these hot spots pop up, being able to respond to that in a pretty nimble way, as nimble as we possibly can, understanding that
Exactly.
It impacts staffing and it impacts what people are expected to do in the classroom.
Well, in our academic strategy, that piece can adjust based on the situation, right? If it's a whole classroom, obviously we have a teacher then right there that continue to engage the kids at home, versus if it's 3 students out of that class, 3 students out of another. So I appreciate the comment about trying to be nimble where we can and seeing how it impacts. And just like Chase's conversation around the lunchroom strategy, we need to take that same philosophy around our academic strategy, but also having a baseline that we're trying to work from about what we can tell people to expect.
One last thought, as you talk with Johnson County Public Health, if you're looking at a strategy that includes testing, to test negative to come back, to limit quarantining, I just want to make sure that those tests are accessible.
Yep.
That there's not a burden, transportation, whatever, for a family to go get a test. We've got to ensure that they're easy for every family to get their hands on.
Exactly. Yep.
Thanks, Janice. That was my question.
So I think the board is definitely in favor of what you're suggesting, because the way I look at the alternative is to go with the Iowa Department of Public Health recommendations, which is don't do anything. And I'm leery to speak for everybody, but I think I can when I say nobody up here thinks we should not have some sort of policy in place. So I think going farther and working out those kinks with Johnson County makes sense, because there is, mostly alignment between CDC and Johnson County. I think that puts us in a good place to mitigate spread and to also, reduce quarantines. We don't, the idea is not to quarantine, right? The idea is to not quarantine and to not get kids sick. So how do we best do that? I think that's the policy that we're looking for.
Yep. I think we know what to do, and I would agree with you 100%. You know, we don't want kids quarantined. Rutina's example about students being quarantined 3 or 4 times, you know, that's a worst case scenario, you know, event for us, right? We don't want those types of things to happen, and that makes it difficult for families. That means kids aren't learning. I mean, those are accomplishing none of our goals. And so we really need to try to build this to conform to the health and safety protections that we're trying to provide, but also keeping in mind our academic focus. And I think keep coming back to the data, just like Rutina talked about too. I think that's what we have to do. We have to commit to talk about it, commit to making sure that we make the best decision with the information at the time as we go throughout. And we have good history of doing that, right? That we've done that and we continue to do that. So we can start this way, and we'll bring that data, you know, those first couple weeks after school starts, that first September meeting, and we'll have a good marker to go from as we engage in that conversation.
All right. With that, I think we need to move over to our other document that's attached here that has sort of all of the guidelines together, because there's a lot to get to there. You know, plenty of folks coming to talk to us about specific things that are in there. I'd like to just throw out probably an easier, well, maybe it's not easy, but, you know, one of the commenters specifically was talking about the parent volunteers in the buildings, and I'm going to come at it from admittedly a very personal place, because this is specific to me, so know that going in. But I'm picturing that we are allowing, say, football game to happen, right? It doesn't actually say here if people can go to a football game, but that I could find, because it says in district buildings. But I assume that also means that the football team is playing, the marching band is playing. My kid is in marching band, and this week there's parent volunteers supposed to be there to help kids do fittings for their uniforms, and if they don't do that, the marching band's not doing their uniforms. So those things are married, right, for that to be successful, which I think was the point of the community commenter, is that you can't do one without the other. And so that's a piece that I would like to at least throw out there. And I think the idea was to think about it in terms of, you know, is there a different policy that's applied to some of those secondary activities? You know, if we are going to talk about more likely that folks are vaccinated or things like that, is that applicable or not? How do we, if that's not applicable, then how do we make sure that the programs that are still allowing to run can actually run with the limitations that are there?
Chase, do you want to get into the activities conversation a little
sure.
bit?
So to clear that
I said it
piece
out
up,
loud. I realize it's not easy.
Sure.
Sorry.
We do have a companion document, which we had last year as well, about activities and athletics that we have updated for this year that does allow for athletics, music, theater events to take place as we were doing at the end of last year. Really, the restriction on attending those is only for indoor, where we've set that 50% capacity. So I know, Sean, that your kids go to Liberty, so if there was a music performance, not by the marching band, but in the theater, one of the smaller bands, and let's say that the Liberty Theater holds 700 people, parents, others could still come attend that performance, just as long as we kept the capacity of the spectators to 350 people, if the capacity of that theater is 700 people. And so that is kind of along those guidance about meetings. We do have that restriction on visitors and volunteers in the building K12. If there's a discussion that the board wants to have about separating that between secondary and elementary, I think that, you know, we're happy to engage in that, but I think that would go across the board in everything. We have shared this with our administrators, including our ADs. They did not have overwhelming pushback on limiting the volunteers in those capacities, about ensuring that programs could continue to run. We had some conversation about, okay, we need ticket takers. Do you allow those people? And so we're trying to work through some of those details about what are those operational pieces that help those student activities and performances happen on game night or performance night, but really not so much the volunteer piece on the day-to-day operations of the practices as we talk about. But I think one of the main takeaways is we're not distinguishing between fine arts and athletic activities like we did at the beginning of last year. Performances performances, games, contests for all extra and co-curricular activities can take place this year. We just have those restrictions on capacity for indoor events as compared to outdoor events.
So, I mean, they're right next to each other on here. What you just said, it says, meetings are allowed, social distancing, indoor gathering limited to 50% of the capacity, right? That's all the stuff you just said. Right above that, visitors will not be permitted in district buildings.
Right, and that was the same as last year.
Right.
That not, like,
No, that
how
was
could I be a visitor at a meeting and not be?
That was actually the exact same guidance as last year. We didn't allow visitors or volunteers in buildings, but we did allow
Attendees
members of
for
the public to
performances or-
attend athletic events in our gyms and to attend concerts at the end of the year. So that's the exact same protocols that were in place for the majority of last year as well.
I think like Chase said, maybe it was spelled out differently and received differently because we had the companion document last year. So that was, you had the companion piece that talked specifically then about attendees of events where visitors would have just been applying to the school buildings during the day as the frame of reference reads there.
Okay, I'm not sure I'm getting any more clarity there. It seems contradictory in the way this is written anyway, so.
Fair enough, we could go back and clarify that.
So my very specific example, can my wife go and help kids with fittings while they're having marching band practice?
I mean, as of right now, no. And I think one of the ways we look at that is it's hard for us to distinguish why we're not going to let volunteers in to support the academic learning that's going on in our buildings, but we are going to let them into the buildings to support extracurricular activities. And so those are the things that we wrestle with internally as an organization as we talk about our mission. And we want to support the whole child, not only in the classroom, but also in those extracurricular activities. But if we're going to allow those supports for things outside the classroom, we're really hard pressed of why we wouldn't allow the supports for things inside the classroom. And so as we look at it and we do try to provide flexibility, those are the conversations that we somewhat struggle with as we go through these guidelines.
Can visitors and volunteers be outside?
Yeah, there are no restrictions on people being on campus
district
outside.
grounds,
Right, so if it was outside.
I mean, Sean,
I'm really struggling here.
I share
Last time I
your
checked, the marching band was part of the curricular band choir. It is not an extracurricular. It is part of their class.
How did
One
they get
parent or two parents in the building helping to do an event is not okay, but up to 350 in the auditorium is okay. It's not lining up for me, so I'm really struggling
Well, so I
with
think
it.
the question, Sean, is then how do we differentiate? So if we have an unmasked parent volunteer, unvaccinated, that wants to come into our elementary school and volunteer in their kid's classroom, what's our stance about the ability to say no to that event versus the best case scenario where it's a masked, vaccinated parent that wants to help out with the marching band? I think that's where we struggle on how these things fit together. So it's relatively easy to look at them in isolation and say, oh yeah, that one doesn't feel good, we shouldn't allow that. This one does, we should allow this. But structuring the protocols around how to protect our kids' health and safety or our staff members, in that case, we can't require masks of anybody in our building, and that includes volunteers and visitors. And we can't ask their vaccination status before they come in. So I think those are all some of the factors. It's not to do, again, with not supporting music or the ability to carry out those programs. It's about how do we make all of our protocols talk together.
I 100% share your frustration, Sean, because I am not a visitor or volunteer. I'm a coach, but I'm an unpaid coach, and I was not allowed to step foot into City High at all last year to coach my team. And so I get it, but at the same time, we all did this last year. Like, I'm very empathetic to wanting to get back to normal and wanting to do things differently and putting COVID behind us. But you guys measured your marching band uniforms last year somehow without anybody going into the district. And I coached my mock trial team without ever stepping foot into City High. And all of these curricular and extracurricular activities figured out a way to deliver for our students. And if that's what we have to do while we're at a time of substantial or high community transmission, I think we can do it.
All valid points. I think the part that's going to be hard for me, and somebody said it tonight, that, you know, it's not a sustainable thing, right? We did it once, right? And I wouldn't say that it was all successful last year either, right? And I don't know what all different clubs and groups did last year. I don't pretend to know that. But it's one thing to do something one time. A second time, you could probably swallow that too, but then you have a complete unknown as to how long that would go on, right? I'm not going to argue that we should just piecemeal the rules, right, to fit every individual thing. I get that, Matt, that's not sustainable either, right? We just can't pick and choose what rules we want to apply. But if we don't have a line that we cross that line and now good things can happen, right? It's hard to know when we cross the line the other way that everything's bad again and we can't do this, that, and the other thing. And I think that's where maybe my personal frustration is, right? Because I can't see how it would be, like, what would make anything different?
Well, so
what would the
cut you off.
environment be that makes us say, now it's safe to do this thing and not that thing? And the fact that, I guess, just the rules don't line up in a lot of cases, and it's really hard for me.
To the point that you're making, I think that's why we showed the document the way we did last time, when we showed it with the black sections and the orange sections. And the two we're talking about were actually in orange. And so that line that we've drawn was utilizing that CDC COVID tracker from when we went to the moderate to the substantial. And so the original document we showed you didn't have these visitors and volunteer and large gathering capacity caps when we were in that moderate. And so that answer that question of what are we looking at, we're looking for that transmission rate to go back into that moderate section. So then we would reduce these levels down, take off those restrictions to visitors and volunteers, take off that large gathering events. And because we don't want to pick and choose, that's why we've tried to anchor when we're going to make our decisions based on those transmission rates that are put out by the CDC, because it's a system that's tracked by somebody outside the district. And so if we anchor to that, it's easy for us to look at when we need to reconsider adding or maybe taking away some of the restrictions we have in place.
I don't know if this will make Sean's dilemma easier, but I was just thinking that before, right, we didn't necessarily have access to vaccines, right, or they weren't readily available, right? Right now we do. Some people have been vaccinated. So what if a parent, like, we can require it, but what if a parent comes up and says, here's my vaccination card, I'm going to put on my mask? Is this something, I don't know what we'll do with that, but is this something we can think about in the meantime and see how that would work with situations or scenarios like these?
I think the bigger problem is then denying access to the person that won't produce a vaccination card or won't wear a mask, than saying yes to the person that will wear the mask or will produce the vaccination. And so it works for the door to swing in, but as soon as we say you're denied entry, you know, based on your vaccination status or based on your willingness to wear a mask, that's where we start to get into difficult, I think, territory for ourselves.
Just saying, wouldn't that encourage people to actually get vaccinated?
It would.
It would.
Potentially.
I mean, and that's
Just
what
thinking
really
about.
that's what really changed it. When we lost the ability to require the mask, it you know, the CDC continues to say use layered strategies, and when they say you need to encourage mask wearing and we know we can't, or you should require mask wearing, and we can't do that. That takes out our biggest tool that we have. And so they say you need to look for other ways to help provide protections for students in your schools. And so we know the important role that visitors and volunteers and the members of our communities play in our school district. So we don't like that, but we're trying to balance it against the fact that vaccination is not available to our elementary kids, that even though it's available to our secondary in our county, only 58% of the 12 through 17-year-olds are vaccinated in the county. So, you know, there's still a substantial portion of our secondary kids that don't have the vaccine. And so we have to make sure that we're trying to, I hate to use the word again, balance kind of that health and safety versus trying to get back to incorporating everyone into the school community.
Sean, I think that, sorry, I was just saying that I think that a lot has happened. We forget how this whole thing started. We were extremely strict at the beginning, and things, I mean, the rates, the transmission rates went down, and we reassessed and relaxed the rules a little and the policies a little. But now we are at a stage where we're back to square one plus something else that we have no idea how to control. We don't know much about it. So I feel like starting out being cautious is better than being too relaxed. I don't know if that helps you or comforts you in any way, but.
I totally understand the reasoning, just the implementation, I think, it's contradictory, I think. So I don't want to monopolize. I started with, this is a very personal thing for me, so I don't want to monopolize the entire conversation on my situation. So I will throw stuff out to other folks on this topic or any other ones. I mean, there's plenty of other things in that document that we need to discuss. So I'm gonna let somebody else jump in.
I would just say, Sean, I really agree it is contradictory to allow 350 people in a theater and not allow volunteer. However, I guess for me, that is also a trade-off I'm willing to make, because you can't have a performance without an audience. Like, you just can't do it. And it feels that we might be better able to mitigate, you know, students on a stage and maybe even the distance of an audience for those students. Even understanding that those public folks that are coming in, I think, are taking a risk, you know, that they're choosing that risk. But it is contradictory. I just think, you know, part of me getting comfortable with this is going to be comfortable with some contradictions, and just deciding where we do that or not. I think that, you know, I like the fact that we're not going to differentiate between athletics and performing. I mean, I just think that's equally important if we're going to treat, you know, folks the way I'm struggling too. But when it comes down to it, it's we can't say no to that completely unvaccinated person who refuses to wear a mask to come into our building without a policy that says we're just not going to allow that at all. And that's, if we start allowing responsible people in, we have to allow irresponsible people in. We can't not allow irresponsible people into our classrooms if they refuse to get vaccinated and refuse to wear a mask. And I don't know how else, that's where I don't know how else to get around that. If we allow the responsible folks in, we have to allow irresponsible folks in. And I don't know how else to do it. I don't like it, you know, and at the same time, then saying, well, for a performance, we're going to change that up. I mean, I would assume that's just for audience, right? There's not gonna be volunteers backstage or helping with the hair, you know, all the stuff that parent volunteers do that are really important for all those performances. I don't know. It feels like a trade-off and a contradictory one, but I don't know what I certainly don't want to say no all the way and no audience, you know, just totally limit it that way. But I mean, I'm struggling too, and part of it is, I think, just because there is not an easy, certainly not a simple answer around it.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I mean, this is a struggle, and it doesn't feel good. I mean, we were just here a year ago making these tough decisions. But for me, just personally, in reading this, and I know you guys put this at the top, and I know you put it in bold, but halfway through this, I forget that this is the policy when we're in substantial and high. It was, for me, and again, just personally, it was easier to track when it was better color-coded. And I think for other people that I personally heard from, they also missed that part. that looking at this, people are seeing this is the policy. Some people are seeing this as, this is the policy for the year. There's no wiggle room. This is set in stone. And I have to explain that, no, this is for substantial or high. And as a board, I think even with this, we're committed to looking at how things are going and again, reviewing the data of what other districts are doing and how that's working. Am I wrong in that assumption that even with this, we'll do that?
You're correct.
Okay, so I don't know if there's a better way to highlight that, but for me, it's, maybe it's just me and my reading comprehension skills, but
I do think there is an impact to the visual, Ruthina. I think you're right. I was just going to say, I think you're right. I mean, I think there is an impact to the visual, and even what Sean, I think, was referring to there about, okay, when is the line, right? Like, when do I know that anything's going to be different or better? So I didn't mean to talk over you there.
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we have to do a better job of sort of highlighting, this is the line that we find ourselves in right now. We're going to continue to look at the data. But in addition to the data and where we're at on the CDC, we're going to look at how things unfold around us and how other districts are handling things. Because I think it's important for us to be out in front, setting the path for others to follow. But at the same time, I think it's important for us to look at what other people are doing and learn and see if it's possible for us to incorporate some of those things if we're seeing that they're being successful and how they're handling visitors on their campus or out-of-state travel. And since I brought that up, so out-of-state travel is for everybody, not just students, correct?
And that's your other point. I mean, we want to make it clear. We don't want it to be confusing.
Right.
And
Well,
so this is good feedback for us to say, okay, look, you need to make this more clear. You need to highlight these pieces. We don't want to hide things from people.
Yeah, we do need to make that out-of-state
absolutely
clearer, because I heard from
that was a great point
a
this
staff
evening.
person
That's
like,
true.
wait, I can't travel to this conference? I'm like, no. They're like, so these are just things from me reading it and hearing from people that we have to be clear on what we're saying with these policies, that it's not, even though it says 2021 school year, that doesn't mean it's set in stone and we're not going to be reviewing it and figuring out what's best for our community as a whole.
And I said this I agree with everything you said, and I want to just add, I said this last week, I'm also open to looking at these policies again once all of our PK through 12 students have the opportunity to get vaccinated. A lot of what is driving my thought process in this is that our PK through 6th grade kids can't get vaccinated. They can't protect themselves if they want to. But when they are able to, I am happy to revisit and see if there are some shifts that we can make, in addition to all of the reasons that Ruthina identified.
Yeah, I agree with both Ruthina and Lisa. I think being clear on what are the protocols based on transmission levels. And it was like the Matrix last year, positivity rates, and we would make certain decisions. And I think just clearly, you could be charts or something like that, how things change based on the transmission rates. And I do appreciate everyone's frustration. No one expected to be here this time, but my God, we just talked about quarantining kids for 14 days. Perhaps, this is, educational impacts. It's not a good place right now that we're trying to figure out how to navigate. So I do want to talk about, though, the travel piece, because I'm trying to understand the rationale around not going for out-of-state travel. Is it, and this is based on substantial transmission rates in Johnson County, is when this triggers, right, the no out-of-state travel? And so is it because we're worried, because we're in a substantial transmission rate in Johnson County, that our students would be taking COVID to wherever they were traveling? Or is it, I almost feel like the transmission rate of the destination of the travel may need to be as big of an impact as the transmission rate for Johnson County. So I was just trying to understand the rationale for that, because I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around it, and I was compelled to by the speakers tonight.
Sure. So I think there's, we responded to a lot of different emails today with some of that rationale and some of those bulleted points. I do think just the one you mentioned there, I mean, it may not be the most compelling reason for folks, but I would, you know, at some level, we're in this because we weren't very good at collective responsibility for each other, right? And so, yes, I do think there's an element of, okay, if we're in a substantial or high county, you know, how responsible is it that we're continuing to send folks? I wouldn't say that's our most compelling reason, though, but I would say there's an element of that in consideration. I honestly think for us, it's significant concerns on how we'd handle a vaccinated or unvaccinated person getting ill while we're away, and their ability to use public transportation, if they'd end up in for a hospital stay, and then what would those scenarios look like, and how would we as a district handle those situations if they were half the country away and couldn't use public transportation to get home, or ended up in the hospital. I think a lot of the arguments include the assumption that everyone is vaccinated. You know, Chase just cited the statistic back to you about where our 12 to 17-year-olds are as far as vaccination rates, so I don't think that's a safe assumption that we can make, that everybody's vaccinated. Again, we haven't stated that we're going to check for vaccination status of our staff or our students and compel them to provide that information to go anywhere, and I think once we step into that, that would be a whole different conversation. I think there's also the different states, different rules. Right now, if you're unvaccinated and you go to Chicago, you're supposed to quarantine for 14 days. And so if we're not asking for vaccination status of our staff or students, how can we even let them travel to Chicago if they're supposed to quarantine for a period of time? And that's just Chicago's rule. There could be different scenarios with different rules throughout the country. You know, there's a couple other things that we included in some of these reasonings back. I'm not sure those are, again, the most compelling ones, but unintentional pressure for students or families to attend, even if they don't feel comfortable sending their students to go. If the team is going, then I should go. That may or may not, of course, be these students' experience, but I think those are all, you know, different components that we look through. And yes, there are parts of the country we could be putting our own folks in a more unsafe situation than the one here at home too, depending on the spread of the virus. I also don't think we want to be in the role of trying to judge what destinations are okay and which ones aren't throughout the country, to say, well, this one's okay to go to, this one's not, in that circumstance. So those are a few of our reasons for why the travel one came back into play when we looked at it, and what travel we would sponsor, like Chase said, for our adults, you know, through professional development activities or training circumstances, or for our students in that instance.
This is triggered by moving from moderate to substantial.
This is where we'd be if we're in the substantial high time frame, and that was kind of what I was referencing there earlier, is that, you know, again, this is where we're starting. You know, there's competitions that happen the second half of the year, and we could be in a much different situation by then to revisit, you know, where we'd be with any kind of a travel policy at that point.
I think some of the same risks that you just were describing are there in a moderate transmission and even a low transmission. I mean,
sure they are.
Probably.
It could not just be COVID, it could be something else that could happen that would, you know, disrupt a trip if someone had an accident or something like that. I mean,
I think just when are we increasing the likelihood that those things could happen, or that we could forecast there's some greater likelihood that could happen, so.
Go ahead.
I was debating on whether or not I was going to bring this up, but somebody, a community commenter raised the interesting proposal of having people self-quarantine, if they choose to travel, having students self-quarantine. But I'm not thinking just for substantial, I'm thinking about period. If we have people traveling out of state, I mean, and this is part of me just thinking out loud, but also wanting to perhaps have a discussion as we continue, not that I need an answer tonight, but what's stopping us from requiring that now, even if we're in moderate, or even if we're in the lowest category. If they choose to go someplace that's a lot worse than Johnson County, why can't we ask the student to quarantine for 14 days, regardless of what our level is? That's something to think about. I don't need an answer tonight because I don't like putting people on the spot, but I would like to come back to that and have a discussion as we continue to discuss this policy, because like I said, nothing's set in stone tonight. We're going to continue to talk about this. I'm just thinking about keeping our folks as safe as possible. Even some of our secondary people have reasons why they can't get vaccinated. We have students in our buildings that can't get vaccinated. And so they're looking to us to keep them as safe as possible. And I've heard from a couple. So I want to make sure we're able to do that regardless of what our level is. Does that make sense, Matt? I mean, I'm sorry.
No, it does. I mean,
Okay.
I mean, we started this conversation with quarantines, right, which is a very restrictive measure, right? And some of these things are easier for us to implement and easier small wins that we build up upon. And so it seems somewhat contradictory that we're going to quarantine, go to one of the most extreme things and exclude for 14 days and not do some of the things that are easier. Not that they don't have burdens on our kids or that they have impact to their social emotional well-being or to what a family's experience is in our district. I think for us, it's how do each, and it was just that exchange we were having earlier, how do each of these talk to each other? So if we allow travel, what do we do with field trips? You know, is then an elementary classroom going to the Coralville Mall now in play? And so how do all these things link together? Once you start to undo one, you start a whole web of undoing several protocols at once. And so I don't want it to come off that we're trying to be, over restrictive, try to be more heavy-handed than we need to be in this. I mean, we're trying to put the most reasonable foot forward on some of these things, not make people's life difficult, right? We have to have some protocols, though, or some stance around how we conduct health and safety in our buildings. And if we're missing the mark, we're definitely open to that conversation. I hear you guys pushing back quite a bit tonight on some of these health and safety components. And so we can definitely take another look at it and bring some different. I just think it's going to be hard to then have none of those things or have pretty limited effects here, but tell a family they can't come to school for 2 weeks.
No, and that was a good point because, I was just thinking about one aspect and not the third grade class that wants to go out to the Iowa Children's Museum. Now that opens up. So this is why having this conversation is helpful for me because I can see one piece and maybe not see the other, but I also want to continue to have that conversation.
Yeah, and I think it does go into specific situations. I mean, Lisa started with this. Let's talk about specific examples. And I think that's where we're coming in today is trying to raise up some of these specific examples. And we need to focus on health and safety. We need to focus on academic well-being. We need to focus on social emotional well-being. But it may not be that we have a one-size-fits-all protocol for all of these different scenarios that we're describing tonight. And I think maybe that's the request. If you're feeling like we're challenging, it's like, are there, I won't even say exceptions, I'll say, are there scenarios that warrant, with the proper mitigations in place, a different approach? And so it's just, I think, for me, that's worth considering. Whether we change or not is a different discussion, but I think there are some scenarios that we may be, cutting off our nose to spite our face, to use a terrible example. The controls may not be as appropriate in one scenario as it is in another. And I understand, believe me, the difficulty in managing all the different scenarios and managing expectations with families and students when you do start trying to be a little flexible in certain scenarios. I completely understand that. It's because I'm a huge believer in consistency. You set expectations, everyone gets them, it's very, very clear, it's easy to administer, but I do think it's worth considering some of these scenarios. Are there other mitigations we can put in place to allow some activities to proceed with the proper controls in place? Just worth considering.
Yeah, and to extrapolate on it, because this is what I've been thinking about since I brought up my own personal thing and then talking about the travel and stuff. It was talked about, we can't, say, if you're vaccinated or wearing a mask, you can come in our building and then tell somebody who's not that they can't. Is that true? Can we not do that? I don't know exactly all the laws that passed through Des Moines. There weren't great ones, but I don't know. Did we have a law banning like the vaccine passport so we literally can't do it? I see heads nodding out there.
Yes, that we can't.
We can't ask for vaccination tests. We can't ask them to put a mask on. So yeah.
That's one of the other, speaking of those two, sorry, Sean, but speaking of those two pieces, that's one of the things that we're trying to balance is not get too far out with where we are because we're still hearing there's more guidance coming from Des Moines. And so we don't want to find ourselves in a spot where we send out to our community, this is exactly what we're doing. And then the next day, Des Moines comes back and says, no, you can't do any of that. And so we're trying to balance those pieces as well. And there's a lot of things that aren't clear in the guidance, like can we ask for vaccines or around the quarantine piece, and so we're trying to be measured in those. I think the other thing, and Matt made a good point, if we missed the mark, we can go back and refine this and add more detail, but last year, at the same time a year ago, we presented like a 37-page document that had all these categories and had bullets and sub-bullets and sub-sub-bullets, and it was really overwhelming. And so our attempt this year was to really try to scale that back and make it more easy to digest. And maybe we went too far, Janet, to your point, that we need to be more scenario-based, kind of like we did with FMP 2.0, look at the scenarios and themes. And so we can go back and do that. But I think that was part of our learning from last year too, was we thought it was just so overwhelming how that document laid out and the questions we got, because you had to look here and then look here and then to this sub-bullet. So we tried to avoid that. And, you know, it's a living, breathing document. And so this is good feedback, and we can continue to refine it and make those changes as we move forward towards the first day of the school year.
You don't think the state would like announce something surprising at midnight and make it enforceable the next day?
No, it's never happened, so there's always a first.
Sorry.
I wonder, following up on Janet's indication here, if maybe we should have a subcommittee or subgroup actually do some work on this, which I do not want to be a part of, but I mean, that would give us more flexibility. We're looking at, you know, if we're going to change the staff's presentation or recommendations tonight, because we're not going to have to do so fairly quickly. So, you know, to me, a subgroup would maybe be a way of going forward at this point anyway.
I'll have to disagree, Charlie. I mean, we have the meat and bones here. I think it's up to us as a body with the administration to work through what some of the challenges that, I mean, like what we're doing tonight. This is going to change. Like Chase said, this is the living, breathing document, and eventually it comes back to us as a team to make that final decision on what makes sense. So, because forming a committee will take time to then them have meetings and them make recommendations and for more meetings. I think we're at a point with 13 days out of the school, or however many days we're out from school starting, that we need to take this document and continue to massage it and look at it and work with our administration team and health and safety committee to get it right, as well as the data that comes up as we progress throughout the year.
What? I just support that. I mean, I just think the work we're doing here is very public. It's very, you know, it's very much a conversation. It's very fluid. And I think, you know, a lot of times those committee work gets buried a little bit. Although one got brought up tonight, community comment, but you know, not everybody's paying attention to all those committee meetings. So I feel really good about this process we're doing here as far as talking about this document, and hopefully the administration is getting some feedback that's useful to bring back.
Well, I'd agree with Rutina that we have to have a starting point with school around the corner, right? So if this is our kind of meat and potatoes starting point, and taking what Janet's kind of advice or guidance was here, and we really drill down into some of these scenarios and say, where are some potential exceptions or variances from these general rules that we could start to apply some different parameters, and that's really our conversation. We get back to the 24th, right? So the 24th, it's 2 days, you know, we're only 2 days into the school year, and so we can start this way and easily adjust with some of those. And so I think our team can definitely take some of this feedback back and kind of have some marching orders, if I'm hearing that right, as far as, you know, what you'd like to see next and where we can start to make some iterations. I think Janet also identified the challenge, right? Once you say yes to a couple iterations of this, everyone's going to have a compelling case for why they should be allowed to have an exception to the health and safety rule. And so that doesn't mean we can't look at those and we can't approve them and we can't work through some different exceptions there, but that will be the pressure point, right? That'll be where then we have to be probably firm in our thinking about why did we allow this one? Can we articulate solid reasoning for what the difference is in this scenario compared to another challenge that gets presented to us? So, but if we can start with something from this standpoint and then build off of that, I think we can continue this conversation as we go, because it's not going to be perfect. It never is. No one wants to be here. All those things we've said before. So we know we can continue to learn and do better too.
Yeah, well, I think the scenario-based approach is important. I mean, you gave the one example tonight, Matt, that we could allow people to travel, but in Chicago, they can't go there without quarantining or whatnot. Well, that would be true if we dropped down to a moderate level here and all of a sudden we can allow it and we still can't send them to Chicago, right? So there's going to be scenarios like everywhere that the rules in here and there and everywhere are not going to match. So it's a huge problem. I get it. I think kind of just constantly looking at it is, I think, what we're all hopeful for, that we're trying to be as reactive to the current situation as possible while, maintaining that level of safety. And I will tell you that there are parts that I personally, and a lot of folks out there personally, are going to feel a pinch a lot more than other people are. But that's why there's a whole bunch of other people up here with me helping to craft policy to, for the betterment of everyone. So I get that from that perspective, but as the parent, it sucks, right? And so I'm trying to give you that balance for everyone out there that's probably feeling very defeated right now. But there is that hope that I have that things are going to get better, right? We saw them get better. We felt, I think at our last meeting, Lisa mentioned, like May and early June, we all felt pretty good about how things were looking. And so I'm feeling positive that we'll get back there again and we can start to reduce some of these, but it's going to be painful for all of us in the meantime. And I think that's kind of what we've all had to deal with for the last, 17, 18 months, whatever we're on to now, is how painful it is in the moment to have long-term positive effects. And so my frustration tonight is feeling that very in-the-moment pain. So I appreciate my colleagues up here, grounding me in that, right, our long-term gains and what we need to do as a district. So I appreciate all the work that you guys are doing. I'm going to give you one last second, directors, to jump in on this, because we do still have several items on our agenda, and I'm about to start crying. So
just quickly.
Do we have anything else on this?
Just quickly, I just want to say that this is an ongoing conversation. I really appreciate the comments from the community. I think we are all trying to go through this, so ideas are welcome, scenarios, different solutions are welcome. I think that we're all trying to figure this out together. We are not saying we know what the answer is, but we're doing the best that we can. So please, I'm encouraging everybody to speak up, email, do whatever it is so that we can all work through this together.
I'm looking on here. Do we still have an ESSER funds?
Yeah, I can go through that
presentation part of
relatively
this?
quickly if.
Yeah, with expedience would be
Okay, we'll do-
appreciated.
All right, so we've talked a few times about this, so none of this should be shocking, but I did feel it was important to thank you all for coming this evening. Did feel it was important to include the dollars along with the actual ideas that we had tossed around, and that you see a little bit more strategy to the plan behind. So again, our ESSER funding stakeholder survey communicated these different priorities to us, as I presented that to you a couple weeks ago: supporting the mental health services in supports to that end, providing activities that address the unique needs of low-income children, addressing learning loss, ensuring continuity of learning for all students, and supporting school leaders with resources to address their individual schools. And then question 2, the big themes there were achievement gap, class sizes, learning loss, and mental health. The ESSER allocations we received came in 3 different waves, the largest of which was ESSER 3 with that $27 million number you see there, and then totaling close to $41.5 million for the school district. So the categories, as our team worked through this and received the input of the community, from our teachers, from our administrators, of things that we knew we need to prioritize into that ESSER spending plan, were COVID mitigation and prevention expenditures, technology, at-risk supports, continuity of services, instruction under ESSA, learning loss, and unspent balance support. And remember, when you look back to those 3 funds, we had started spending some of those funds early on. And so things like when you hear, now today, we know we've still talked a lot about COVID health and mitigation, but you can think early on, ESSER 1, what some of those dollars went to in particular, right? So the first category, that COVID mitigation and prevention expenditures, you see mask and vaccine distribution for our staff, HVAC upgrades, custodial supplies, and custodial staffing, some pretty typical expenditures that you would think about in that one. Technology, we know a big effort initially on in the pandemic was to get access for our students, so Chromebooks, hotspots for Wi-Fi access, Zoom and other licenses. We received generous donations from the Foundation for Lexi and Dreambox, but there was still some expense to the district to take care of those. Seesaw, Canvas, those would be the learning management platforms for our elementary and secondary schools, and then the Happy Fox ticketing system to ask all the and get answered all the technology questions we've had in the last period of time. At-risk supports, here's one that's potentially more exciting as we look at the expenditure of these funds, and this includes approximately 25 FTE that will be added to our system, and here we see things from homeless transportation to behavior interventionists, the nursing staff we discussed here at the board table, homeschool assistance program, guidance staffing, restorative justice work that we'll be leading as a district this year, student and family advocates, and then a new position to us, a lead project director, to really focus on parent and student engagement to our school community, specifically for our Black and brown children. Continuity of services. This is a $10 million line item here, and so here you see things that we needed to include just to maintain existing programs, and so to keep the trains moving, if you will, and that, so I don't need to read all of those items to you here, but just a couple highlights. Nutrition fund relief, we knew that was an additional strain on our nutrition staff to make sure that those meals were provided throughout the pandemic, leave scenarios that we needed to provide, the dissemination and administration of assessments, and then we're still waiting on some preschool relief, hopefully from the Department of Ed, but we would like to slot in some dollars there if we need to reserve the right to do that, or if we get the right to do that, excuse me. Instruction under ESSA, smaller category here, but that would talk about our curriculum development, so supported our hybrid and online learning models last year, and then moving forward, K12 online program expenses supports continued development of our online learning program for this coming school year. And then really the big one is learning loss, required-based interventions in ESSER 3, $14.5 million, around 80 FTE into our district accounted here into this portion of the $40 million. And so here you see things from summer to academic supports or academic support teachers at the elementary. Some of that comes from maybe not being able to create as many sections as we would have liked to because of space constraints in our building, but knowing we need another teacher to try to provide some additional instruction to groups of students. But elementary classroom teachers that allowed us to move to those RAM 1 through 4 models, academic supports for secondary, focused on language arts and math, as we've talked about before, additional secondary classroom teachers, equity leadership. We know that our comprehensive diversity and equity inclusion plan is one of our North Stars in the district, and we took this opportunity to make sure we've doubled down and committed to that effort with additional leadership positions created there. Our administrative fellow program that we've talked about and had the opportunity to kick off here in the last month that we're excited about, and then administrative leadership support as well. And then finally, unspent balance support. We just talked a little bit about the unspent balance here earlier in the meeting, but if we did not have ESSER dollars, we would have been on tap for about a $5 million budget cut this spring that we were able to avoid. And so by using these funds, and we were able to retain 20 FTE, let alone the additional staff we were able to add, which put our unspent balance in a more favorable position, as you saw earlier tonight. And now our job is going to be to work ourselves out of the FTE we have allocated here. And so you've heard me say before that, this challenge and articulate this challenge to you. When we spend 85 cents of every dollar on a person, there's no way to spend $41 million in your school district without putting it into the people. And you can tell this is a heavy investment into our people to help our students and to help those folks that helped us last year through the pandemic with our teaching staff and our support staff. And Some of those things I know I glossed over quickly, but there was things that we handled through the negotiation process to make sure that people were compensated for that work that made up a large portion of this too, and we were able to do some effective things there. So I know that's really fast. Happy to come back to it at a later meeting or answer any quick questions you have, but those were our categories, and that's what we'll be submitting for our plan based on, I think, a good amount of feedback that we received from the community and some good alignment on trying to deliver on those needs presented to us. So what you see, then I'll be quiet, I promise, is the last slide here just shows the amount that difference between allocation and encumbered and where we still have some space for needs that either present or as maybe some of these staffing situations fluctuated and continual ideas that come forward. So any questions?
Just a real quick comment. I mean, I think one thing I really appreciate is when we talk about getting back to normal, and some people are like, well, normal wasn't that great to begin with. I think some of the changes you folks are making here is going to make us better moving forward in so many ways with the way that we've, and obviously we have to spend this on staffing, but I think it's the way you've chosen to spend this on staffing that's going to put us in a stronger position to move forward specifically on our diversity and equity and inclusion plans. So I appreciate that.
Thanks, JP.
And on the learning loss one, I mean, that's a big dollar amount. I think that might be the single largest allocation. What kind of research are we using to base our decisions on what kinds of supports and interventions and things that we'd be applying?
Sure, so we're working through guidance that came from the Department of Ed about the research-based interventions. And so while I present to you these categories, these are our defined categories. Now what the Department of Ed actually counts as effective learning loss required research-based interventions may be different as we submitted on the application. So these were how we started grouping them a long time ago. We received guidance from the Department of Ed up to 2-3 weeks ago about what would actually meet this 20% threshold. We're obviously way over the 20% threshold at the 14.5 million mark here, but I might ask Amy if she has any additional comments around that research-based required interventions that we would need to provide.
Yeah, I would say that actually Diane watched the webinar at the end of July, but they're going to continue to provide webinars. They're sharing a clearinghouse with us and things like that. So the DE is continuing to develop that for us, and we'll continue to share webinars. Anything else, Diane, you would add?
I just know there's a lot of folks out there with stuff to sell. And they know districts are swimming in money right now with ESSER funds. And I'm just curious, you know, how we're going to parse through that and really cut through into the things and the interventions that we feel comfortable are efficacious and will do what they're touting to do.
And we do, right? I mean, we use research-based interventions. We do that all the time and do our homework on making sure we're using the things that are the highest impact for kids. You know, and then I can take that to the other end where there's the old saying, it's always people, not programs, right? And so I think you can tell our investment into people, you know, here through this, and they're the ones that deliver the research-based intervention. So I think we, you know, it's not like the pandemic happened and then we discovered what the right program to use for our students were. And so that's what I think we're trying to do to shield against some of that too, Janet, is they know they have things to sell and they know that there's districts that have money, but we need to stay committed to those good things that we know are important for our students. And if we learn of something new that we think is higher impact for our students, then we have a responsibility to look at it too.
I just have a quick question on this. As I recall, we have this year and then the following 2 years to spend it, right? So as we've looked at the amount that's going to people, is it built in there? You know, next year costs a little bit more than this year, and the year after that costs a little bit more. It's built in there. It's making some assumption to increase, kind of based on what we've done in the past.
Yeah, Les looks like he's excited and wants to share something about how he built his sheet for us, but so I'll let him do that in a second. But yes, we accounted for that, Sean, as far as how long we were going to hang on to these positions. And, you know, with the honest thing, you know, with the honest point that we are going to have to transition out of some of these roles at some point. We won't be able to maintain class sizes if we either boom in enrollment or if we don't get the necessary enrollment, because we are going to have to walk out of some of these components. And so that's just one simple example where it might feel especially relevant. But Les, anything else you'd want to provide into how we made sure to factor in for that ongoing?
No, Matt, you went essentially where I was going to go is if in next year, if we had 14 positions for one of those categories, in the second year or the third year after that may go down to 8 and then 4 as we transition those folks into other positions or into other needs through our enrollment growth or just attrition of staff that we know we have turnover each year. So we've built that kind of sliding scale backwards, if you will, which is what you need to do.
So you're seeing it all costed out here, that 3-year transition period, about how we'd accounted for that over that period of time.
I figured it was, but I mean, I know it's one thing to think about, okay, you know, we're gonna negotiate things in the spring and then the following spring and numbers will go up and we'll get our paltry state increase. And, you know, I don't want us to get to a point at the end of 3 years go, oh, we don't have the money all of a sudden and, you know, have to look at those budget cuts again that we avoided, you know, now, right? I don't want to just have that be kicked down the road. Well, it may be kicked down the road because we don't know what happens, you know, after the ESSER funds runs out, but I don't want to kick it down the road 1 or 2 years while we have those funds, right? That would be pretty bad planning on our part, but it sounds like you did it, so works for me. Anything else, directors? All right. Shall we move on to our next discussion item? It's our policy updates, and there's a whole lot in there, and I think I could kick this off to Matt, but I think a lot of it is some updates based on laws that changed, right? And so there was some new policies kind of handed down, guidance from, you know, ISB and, you know, legal things that we needed to put in there. That's what the vast majority of this is. So it looks like a lot, but I think they're, for the most part, it's minor, but.
Yeah, well, it was not a friendly legislative session, I mean, to say the least, right? I mean, I think we all experienced that and know that some of those outcomes from the legislative session were not good for us in public education or good for our local community in general. You know, there is a lot of policy here for you to review. We're not looking for approval yet tonight. We're just asking for you to kind of take those in as a first reading to make sure you're able to digest it. You can bring back questions before we ask for approval on the 24th. You know, Ms. Hester spoke to us tonight, and I would want to reiterate that we don't want her to stop teaching, you know, the things that she is teaching in some of those conversations she's having with her kids. And you know, we are having, honestly, a hard time explaining this conversation with our teachers and our staff about how do we protect them, at the same time stay committed to our DEI work and to the good things we know that they do on a consistent basis. And yeah, it is an oversimplification to say, let's stay focused on your standards, while we know there's all the other things that happen during the day and all the natural conversations that come up. But I think what the fine line we're trying to walk on a few of these is the teachers are relatively expected to walk a fine line, and we have a job to try to protect them and make sure they know where the line is after this legislative session, and also still do those things that they know are good for kids, that we know are good for kids, that are important learnings for students to have. And so that's part of the process we're trying to work through. We tried and delivered an administrative update to our admin council this past week around a lot of these changes. Learned a lot from the questions that they provide us, just like we learned a lot around health and safety questions you provide us here tonight, and then we come back and try to do better by the time we welcome our teachers back and make sure that they're on some solid footing by the time they step into their classroom. But I just want to be clear that as a district, there are several legislative changes here we would not endorse or support, right? These are not things that we would have asked to change. This is not the direction we would go. And we know that there's a real fear for our staff out there in some of these, but we do believe the scope of some of these things is fairly limited, but it doesn't change the emotional response around it, nor should it necessarily. I think people should be upset and should be paying attention to what's going on in that direction. But our job, again, is to administer what the rules are, to administer the law, and then to help our staff feel like they have good knowledge and good confidence about what that is so that they continue to do their jobs effectively. So with that, I know where you're at time-wise. I don't know, you know, we have a presentation prepared to go through each of these, if that's what's most effective to do tonight, President Eystone, or how you would like to handle that. I mean, there's conversation around each of these points, and so if we get into that, I mean, there's enough here to talk about, I guess is what I'm saying.
I guess I would look around at my colleagues up here as to how much they want to put into it now. I mean, we owe it to do it right, so I want to make sure we're
Yeah.
doing it right.
Yeah, that's the thing, I don't want to.
I would agree, we owe it to do it right, and me personally, I would want a work session because I have questions about how can we ensure that we're not whitewashing history. I mean,
Yep.
things are just the facts, whether it makes people uncomfortable or not. And I want to be able to have that, that deeper dive
Yep.
with
Like
the
you said, a
admin
conversation
team.
around it,
Yeah.
right? I mean, we need to be able to have
And
back
I
and
don't
forth.
think I can do it justice tonight. I mean, I have questions, but I want us to have dedicated time and find an agenda where we're not up at the board table for 2.5 hours, then go in the back, because I want to have a very committed and energized conversation around this.
One thing, can I
100%
add one
support.
thing before you say JP, just as you guys marinate on that thought? Is some of these will be timely to approve on the 24th, that they say the board was to approve, some of these things like the policy around being able to call for hearings or things of that nature. So one thing to consider would be, would you consider approval and then the follow-up conversation, knowing that a lot of these are laws dictated to us, and it's not like we're presenting best practice changes to you necessarily in most of these. These are changes that have to happen because of the law. So if we want to have an overview type at the meeting and then the long extended conversation, as Ruthina is suggesting, I think would be a benefit. But we probably should not let that conversation get in the way of approval. So, sorry, Director Clausen.
Well, I was just going to agree with what Ruthina said. Especially I think to express to our staff that they have the board support, and not to do that in a rushed way that feels very generic and, just a throwaway line. I'd like to have a conversation, talk about this in a deep way. I hear you that we don't have a choice to pass some of these things. I do think there is a lot of nuance that we can give our staff a lot of assurance, but I'd like for us to discuss that in a really meaningful way. And I think I agree, a work session that's fresh, where we can really engage in that, would be worthwhile.
I think it'd be good to have counsel at that conversation too, to guide on some of the legal language and around actions we can take, in that context. Just, I think, for me, it would be helpful.
Sure, we can definitely have them there.
So just, again, my 2 cents. I mean, I'm not saying to delay approving those.
No, I
that are
got you.
Okay,
Yep.
I just want to make sure, but I also want to have that conversation and talk about who's at the table when we have that conversation as well.
Yeah, I have to say, just on that, for that teacher to come and share her story tells a lot more than I think anybody up here being able to talk about that, or having even you guys come in and say, that's a real example of how the chilling effect that these policies can have on very real conversations that happen in classrooms, that as a teacher, I think folks want some assurance of how they can go through that. So it's.
Well, I think that was some of what we engaged with the community. I think Roy Sand's still here when we talked a little bit about Black Voices Project last night. That is some of the spirit of this legislation, right? Is that those conversations stop, that those things end in our classrooms, that people stop talking about it. And we don't want that to stop, right? And so that's where I hear you guys saying, then what can we do to support our staff, that they feel like they're on solid ground to do that? And that's our vested interest too. And so that's why we're trying to make sure we get it right when our staff comes back, that they feel that way. But we also have a responsibility to let them know this is what the law is. And it may not be us, that is the person you have to worry about. There's going to be people paying attention to what the law is and holding you accountable to the law. So how do we not shut down those conversations and make sure they feel confident that they know what the boundaries professionally that they're being subjected to are?
So I'm trying to wrap it all up for us, because we're a policy group, right? That's our job, is to create policy, and some of it we're forced to, and some of it we want to. And I think as we look at some of this, we're sort of forced to do it, but this is all policy. I think a lot of it's kind of verbatim out of the code and things like that, and we're just sort of forced to do it. So I think the idea of having the discussion of how we support, Matt, you said the word, we don't think they have the scope, or we think the scope's limited, and how do we support our staff has come up. We can have added policies that are our guidelines or our reference, right? We have our R's and G's, and I don't remember what all the different letters are, that can sit there, that if we have that discussion as a group of, here's our definition, or here's our guidance that we're supporting people, and we codify that in a guideline type document that we add as an additional policy. So it's there, right? Like, that's just as meaningful as our policy, as whatever we were dictated to from the state. And I see us, and you tell me if this seems like it would work in practice, is that we have that discussion work session wise, come up with some of those guidelines types things, and then kick it to the P&G committee to try and figure out how can we work those into policy to add, right? We do our due diligence of adopting the policies that we're told we have to, but that doesn't stop us from putting more to it that is more meaningful to how we as a group see them playing out in our district. Does that sort of all make sense as a way to go forward?
I think that makes sense, Sean, and then I do think that's why it'd also be valuable to have the legal, counsel there too,
Right.
so that we don't go to all the
We don't
work
wanna
to create a
contradict
policy that doesn't have, it won't have the substance or the backing we intend it to, and so that's why we need to have Joe there to give us some counsel on, okay, what can we do about this, right? What else can we do to try to protect our staff? What makes sense to reinforce our values and our intent into policy as well? So I think that'd be a great conversation.
And Matt, that's what I was going to add, and I think it goes back to one of the points that Melanie made, is that one of the tools they're using is the referral of educators, of leaders to the BOE, so that underscores that point of why we want to make sure that whatever we put in there is in line with the law. The other thing is that the school year's coming in 13 days, and so while I agree about the work session of this conversation, Amy and I have been working on how do we deliver this information to our teachers so they have some more information as they go into the classroom, right? Because we don't have this conversation until the beginning of September. The school year's already started, and so we want to make sure that we get some information to them before that. There's a webinar through the DE that we're going to make available. We speak out legal counsel. One of the other law firms we work with, Allers, is working on a presentation that's specific for staff that we're also going to make available for our principals to share with staff members. Now, granted, that's overall, it's not Iowa City specific, and so we need to make sure that we go back and commit to what is important to us. But we feel like there are these pieces that we need to make sure we get out to our teachers sooner rather than later as we do that. And so that's something we should get from Allers this week that will help fully provide some clarity. Again, not where we are in support of our work around DEI, but at least starts to provide some of that clarity for staff as they enter the school year. And this will be a nice message to be able to deliver to our staff along with that is, hey, we've worked with the board, and as an admin team and a board, we're committed to sitting down and really putting down on paper and then codifying what this means to us and what we can support. So I appreciate that on behalf of our staff and our teachers. I know Brady's here. I'm sure he appreciates that as well from an association standpoint. But I didn't mean to interrupt, but I didn't want our staff to walk away from this conversation thinking we weren't going to provide them anything between tonight and the first day of school.
I would really like to hear what staff are asking you to provide in terms of guidance to them, or what questions they have. I think Ms. Hester's presentation tonight in BVP last night really helps me to understand what their perspectives are and what they want clarified and what they want support, what they want to be assured that we will support them. So if you can, personally to me, if you can feed us whatever you're asked to us, just to let us know what you're being asked about.
Yeah, and again, I mean, I'm almost hesitating to say this, but I think the cautionary piece that we'll just need to continue to engage around this in the work session is you may have staff to want you to support them in a position that you're not able to support them in a position.
Well,
I get their position on it, how strongly they feel about it, and I don't blame them necessarily for that aspect. But Charlie, what we've heard a lot of the root of it is about what I can teach in my classroom, right? That's a lot of the concern in the conversation about administrators had a lot of conversation about how to regulate how to deal with the intellectual freedom, the freedom of expression, and some of those things are becoming more hot button issues for them. So I think it'll be a good conversation to know where that, what those questions are, what's the line, where we can try to help them if they feel compelled to step over that line, what are the what are those consequences? Chase just talking about the BOE that, they take complaints from anybody, right? And not just the school district. So all of those things are real. They're not fun. It's not where we want to be, but I think that's the need for the conversation.
Well, that's one of my jobs is to figure out what you've just described. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think Chase, actually nailed it, right? I mean, knowledge is power, so I don't think we want to not give out information and guidance and support to our staff while we're waiting to codify things, but I think that is a very necessary step to still do it, right? So, yeah, we're not waiting on doing anything because, day one of teaching is stepping into that arena where it's an unknown. Is what I'm going to say going to come back to haunt me, right? It takes one upset person to, open up that can of worms, and we have to be prepared, as a district of how we're going to react to that and support that staff member, right? So, yeah, we can't wait for us to do it, but we still have to do it. I don't know. Is there more on the policy? Do we need to go through it at all? Does everybody feel, I kind of looked through the thing myself briefly, but.
Come on, there's only 30 of them, so we can do that real quick.
I read them.
I mean, I think sorry, Matt,
They are what they
that
are.
legislative changes document that Matt just opened up for folks that are watching or for the board members, I mean, that provides those links. Amy did a nice job of compiling this for us. Provides a summary that the DE's gotten, and so as you have free time to read through some of these, or people that are watching, I mean, those are the ones that Matt's really talking about. And so if folks at home are trying to figure out where we're going, where our conversation is, this is probably the best document for this overall policy primer of where to read to get an understanding of what we're discussing, and where we know we need to come back and spend more time.
We might also realize that this legislation is not the easiest to understand.
Not at all, Charlie. I mean, we've spent a lot of time with it, and like I said, I mean, still in our conversations with administrators this week, I think there's pieces we learned and pieces we know we need to rephrase, and so I was agreeing with you, our job is to know where that line is, but I mean, our job is to help you understand that, and so I think that's what we want some additional time to do. These aren't going away anytime soon, and so I think spending some time looking at it, on your own, and then us being able to come back and have a conversation around it in a work session next week is going to be the most effective way to do it. It's not going to be an effective conversation at 10 to 9 to go through these and understand them at a high level.
I would ask if it's okay with you, Matt. Traditionally, I would ask our directors if they have questions to funnel them through you, but you have very nicely laid out who was going to talk about the different pieces. If it's okay as people review it and they have a question about one of the ones that falls into that category, is it okay to pose the question via email or whatever to whichever person is on there? And we could CC you on it as well, Matt.
I was just going to say, copy me and then we can aggregate it.
Is that an okay thing to let board directors know how to do? And I don't know if they will or not, but I figured if we wanted to try and quickly just kind of get some information down. I think more of it's going to be, do we feel like there's like typos or wording or things like that? And I mean, we're pulling it from a lot of code that we don't have a lot of leeway in it. So I could tell you how I'd want to word them all, but that probably is not really possible. But.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, the actual policy portions, not the guidance documents. Those were the models from the School Board Association. So that's what we worked from to construct those. Yes, of course, it's fine to email the staff. I would, like Sean said, just ask you to CC me so I can see the themes of the questions coming through so that I can help kind of structure our conversation for the work session. I can tell you, I think the one you're going to have the most questions around is the first one, right, where it's Chase and Amy attached to that. And that'll be the one I think that generates the most conversation for us there, at least at this present time. There's some other, impact ones too, but that's the first one.
All right. Unless everybody was really feeling sad that they don't get to present tonight, all you people that are on there. I think that's a good approach then, to move forward tonight? All right. We good to move on? Let's move on. The next discussion item is legislative priorities, and these are the IASB priorities. And I got to tell you that I didn't do my homework at all on looking at this, and I just now looked at it and it says the deadline to submit is tomorrow. It's not a huge deal that we actually do it or anything. I am going to give a mea culpa that I had zero time to look at it. So I don't know, has anybody spent some time looking at ISBs, and did you come up with some things? I think we're probably all going to be in alignment, but
I don't know.
if you've looked at it, I would love to hear your
My
thoughts.
number one is local control. That's my number one priority. I don't know how the rest of the directors feel, but I mean, there's a lot of the same ones that we look at every year, right? Preschool, mental health, state aid, of course, labor employment, bargaining rights kind of thing, bringing back that capability. But number one for me after this year is local control.
Yep, I'm with you. And I don't, sometimes we put, maybe a bit more work into this in other years, but, considering, I think, the legislature is going to do what it's going to do. However, we were able to get some things through. I mean, some things did go through, but for me, I think what would stand out, local control, number one. And then we're one of the few districts that publicly puts out there that we would like the restoration of Chapter 20. And I think that's a good statement for our staff, that we support them and that we would like to see that, those protections put back in the law.
That has been in their priorities in the past?
Yeah, that's been in our priorities, yeah. Not, IASB hasn't taken that one up, but we have submitted that.
That's not in our list to choose from IASB.
Yeah, that's why I mentioned it, because it's...
It should be.
Because the rest of that, right, I think we agree, this is why we are a part of IASB, is really it aligns in a lot of ways, but I think that's one way that we can signify publicly that we do support our staff, and that's my opinion, is that we would support the restoration of Chapter 20.
Oh, I think I agree, yeah.
Anybody else kind of, I'm trying to scan through it pretty quick. I think that you're spot on with our local control. I think that, I guess they have labor employment laws as a thing now.
Nice.
So I guess that would align with restoring Chapter 20 to a certain degree. It doesn't explicitly say that.
And then if we had to be specific about money asks, funding the children's mental health system, I think is going to help us and schools across the state, just in general, that we have a children's mental health system with not a lot of money behind that. And that's just a dire need. I'm also mindful of the fact that it's like 4 minutes to 9. And
Right. And I know, if I recall procedurally, I think, Kim, do you enter those? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm trying to look through, have we hit, I think we get to say like 4 of them. So I don't want to belabor this because we're just one in a cog of a whole bunch of districts. I'm going to throw stuff in there, but we get the chance to do it. I'd like to do it at the very least. So I think our local control and the labor employment laws, I think, are 2 big ones. And then we get 4. So I think teacher leadership and development is a big thing. We just got through talking about how do we support our staff in a crappy time. So I like that one. Yes.
Sorry, we said mental health already, right?
I mentioned that, yeah.
Okay. I'm just asking, that's one of our priorities.
Yeah.
Or the
Mental health, yeah. So.
And I would like to see dropout at risk support. I mean, as a district, we do a good job at that, but I think that needs to be a continued priority shared with our governing body.
We got 5, didn't we?
Yeah.
And I was going to say it wouldn't be a meeting if I didn't say I'd advocate for early childhood ed,
Yeah.
preschool.
Say that too.
Okay, so.
Now she has 6.
Now we have 6. Kim, how quickly, I don't know what our deadline is to enter them tomorrow. Could you send out a quick doodle poll to all of us tomorrow morning, and we just pick our top 4 from the 6 that we have there, and winner take all?
Yep.
That sounds like a plan.
Trying to be expedient here. I know all you people out there listening to us yammer about stuff and probably getting tired. I'm getting tired. That seem reasonable, everyone? All right, so check your email early. All right, let's move on. An update on our community engagement on our FMP stuff. So we finished up our first round, is that correct?
We did. And we're excited to be able to share some of our feedback today and talk next steps. And I am going to go rather quickly in respect for the time and try to leave as much as questions as I can. You'll see a number of tabs across the top. We've broken down this data into some of our smaller subgroups, but I will save that for the questions. But I do want to share our overall FMP 2.0 community engagement feedback. We had 784 participants that filled out the feedback form, and we're very pleased with that. We did it a number of different ways. We had our community Zoom meetings, 5 of those, 3 in the evening, 2 during the day. We had staff meetings internally, both for administrators and for our teachers and support staff. And we went out and met with some of our community groups, including the Equity Committee and the Black Voices Project, Black Voices, to try to get a variety of opinions from our community. And so we put that all together, and those different groups are kind of broken out in board docs tonight that you can review. And we can talk about those specifically if you want, but just this is where it came out and shook out overall. So you see our top 6. We asked people to pick 6, and social emotional learning, additional classroom space, career and technical education, learning pathways, college, career, and life ready. That's 1. Health and safety, and then STEAM and STEM rounds out the top 6. And you can see there that drop off from 244 to 199, about 45 vote difference between that 6th and that 7th, with outdoor learning spaces, climate action, and technology and language immersion being the next 4 to round out that top 10. And so when we talked earlier in the spring, and what we showed to them when we had the meetings was, this was the document that we were building. If you remember, we started with Portrait of the Graduate at the top, those attributes, and then we had some work in May about the school board guiding principles, ensuring equity and inclusion, growing early learning, increasing student opportunity through school design, and supporting the whole child. And so as we did these engagement sessions, we made sure to say that this overlaid everything that we were doing. And so as we built the document where we wanted the community's input and to build that out, is they provided those facility planning priorities. And you see them listed here: additional classroom space, career, CTE, health and safety, learning pathways, social emotional learning, and STEM and STEAM. And so the idea was, now we would go back and work as an administrative team along with the board and start identifying projects, not specifically, we're going to add 2 classrooms to X school, but more kind of a general approach of, this is how we think some of our facility master improvements fall under these different buckets that our community has deemed important as we do this FMP work. So once we do that, then we'll go back out to the community and share that more detailed approach of, here's how we themed this out, here's how we built it, starting with Portrait of a Graduate, down through our guiding principles, down through our community input, and then here's what we think FMP 2.0 might start to resemble in front of the votes that we have in November, which Les is going to talk about that ballot language here in new business in just a few minutes. So when we look at the timeline, we're here on, wait, oh, did we not update this timeline, Kristen? Is this the wrong one? We'll get you an updated timeline. It's late. We didn't upload the right one, it looks like. But we're here on the 10th of August, and we're talking about the vote on the ballot language, and then also discussing where we're going to land on the projects. We actually would like to ask that the board consider meeting as a committee of the whole, even though it's not a committee of the whole, on September 7th, which is the next operations committee meeting, to really get in and have a discussion about what the projects look like. Given that it's 9 o'clock, we didn't feel like we knew it would be late. We didn't think there was enough time to do that tonight. Also, with you just having this information right now, we felt it was better to come back. But with the election date, November 2nd, and the first board meeting in September not being until the 14th, we thought that was too late. And so planning on hopefully meeting on September 7th to have a broader discussion about, here are some of the ideas we have, things we know are left over from FMP 1.0 that need to be completed, but also based on the feedback that we've heard from the board and we've heard from the community, some of the areas where we believe we need to go out to the community and tell them, this is some of the work that we're going to do. Then after we do it on the 7th, we'd have another opportunity to kind of finalize the community engagement documents we would use on September 14th, and then go back out and have another round of community information sessions, because we really wouldn't be looking for feedback. It'd be more like sharing that information with the community prior to the November 2nd second election. And so we would do that the last 2 weeks in September and then through the month of October leading up to the November ballot initiatives. That's a very quick recap. But if you go back, and I'm going to show you a different version of this document to give you a little more detail for folks watching at home or in the audience, you can kind of see really the definition of what those different planning priorities mean. Board members, I gave you a sheet that has them listed on there along with all the other ones, but these are the descriptors that the community saw when they were making their selections of why they wanted us to prioritize these in the work that we were doing. So again, I know that was quick, but in the interest of time, I wanted to leave any time that we had for discussion, so I'll open it up for comments or questions.
Go for it. Whoever wants to
So
jump in.
I'll start. I want to thank Chase and the rest of the team for all of the work they did. I had an opportunity to attend every single one of the community engagement sessions, and it was such a rewarding process to listen to people talk about these. And what was great about attending all of them is usually one concept would sometimes rise to the top, and you would get a really detailed discussion about one thing, but in every session it was something different. And so it was a great way to get a lot of perspectives on things. And I really enjoy this document that's on the screen now. To me, it's a nice way of putting all together the work that we've been doing with Portrait of a Graduate, our guiding principles, and then the FMP 2.0 planning. It came up in Operations Committee, and one thing I wanted to float, and I know it's 9, but have a discussion about, is those 6 priorities under stakeholder facilities planning priorities are what we've heard from the community, and they may not align perfectly with the board priorities. And that was part of the discussion that I think we wanted to have is, are we ready to adopt all 6 of these as kind of board planning priorities, or do we need to have a discussion as a board about whether or not there's 1 or 2 that we may want to think about? I'll personally say, what draws me to this is that the 5 of them, excluding STEAM and STEM, the 5 of them are these big idea kind of principles that I like that. It latches on that because I don't want us to get, what Chase said, bogged down in details and say, we're going to put 2 classrooms at, each school. It's these big, this is what we're going towards. STEAM and STEM seems more narrowly tailored, and maybe we leave it there. I mean, the community that did rise to the top, but 2 others that kind of rose to the top were the flexible multi-purpose spaces or the innovation and 21st century buildings. And I do think that those concepts bring in STEAM and STEM. They also bring in language immersion or magnet schools, other concepts that were pretty popular, and thank you, Chase, for putting that up, that are pretty popular on that graph. And so I'm wondering if we want to broaden that one category to kind of capture in more of ideas that were popular with the community but didn't necessarily rise to the top 6.
I guess I could see looking at that, Lisa. One of the things that struck me after listening to the Equity Committee and the Black Voices Project discussions was that participants said and recognized that many of these categories, there's both overlap and interdependence. So, and I can see where you're going, so.
And like, for example, to get to that, like, accessibility was very important in that discussion. And it didn't make top 6. But if we kind of broaden, if we had a broader category like innovation in 21st century buildings, we could respect that. That, of course, means part of being innovative and being a 21st century building is that it is accessible to everybody. And so we can pull in kind of more of these specific topics that I think were too specific to get up to the top, but not leave them behind by umbrelling them under other principles.
So the idea is on September 7th, the request is for the full board to come to an operations committee and I think have this conversation. It would by that session, and Chase, if you said this and I missed it, I'm sorry, kind of the categorizing of the existing list to these 6.
I did, yes, and I realized after I got done talking that I was talking very quickly, so no apologies
I'm
needed.
sorry I missed that, but I think that's an important thing, is just to take the lists that we have and kind of map them into these top 6 priorities, see how they play out. The other thing that struck me in the operations meeting, gosh, Monday, just yesterday? Oh my God. Was just that there was so much alignment between all the different stakeholder groups. Whether it was the big community survey versus the special sessions, and the alignment was really there, and that felt good. That we're really honing in on topics our community and stakeholders really care about, staff and equity committee, et cetera. And so, I mean, if we need to wordsmith or to broaden, but I think having the examples of the list and how they map might actually help us have that conversation.
And, we've gotten this question because we did float kind of a draft, kind of here are some example projects back in January. And so we'll probably go back to that, right? Things that we've already put out there that say these are examples. And we try to reiterate that we're not, trying to connect to there's 2 rooms at this school, for example, but trying to put that in. So yes, we'll pull back on that document, Janet, that we've already looked at and start kind of placing these things underneath there, because that's the whole purpose of this, is to make sure that the projects that we have are responsive to what our community thinks learning should look like as we move forward. And we heard some of that. It's not surprising that additional classroom spaces is second, because there was a lot of discussion, all of the different community sessions about class size. And well, that makes sense from a facility standpoint. How do you address class size? You build more classrooms is one of those ways that we look at it. And so we see, which is what we wanted. We wanted these facilities themes to better align with instructional practices and curriculum themes, and that's what we ended up getting. And so it's nice to see that synergy between the two and that coming together in that aspect.
I'll just throw that, between Lisa said something and Janet said something, I'm going to put them together because there was a lot of alignment amongst the different groups, but accessibility was one of those things that was not. It was first in one group and it's overall 17th, right? And I read this description of accessibility and I'm like, how is that not somebody's priority, right? So I think to your point, Lisa, if we can bring that into a bigger thing to make sure that it's happening, that's great. But we can't just assume that 21st century equals that, right? It has to be specified that that's what it means, or that's part of what that means, right? Or it will still get lost, even if in our heads we're thinking it. But yeah, that was the most disappointing thing when I looked at it. I was like, how is accessibility 17th overall, right? And I know that there was a lot, I think I attended 2 sessions, and there was a lot of, well, I think that's covered here, so this thing's not covered, so I'm going to put that there. So I think people were hearing it differently, and even if with these kind of descriptions that you have here, which help, right, I think people still were just not seeing it all. So as a thing, like, accessibility's got to be a priority, right? So I just wanted to add that's where the alignment falls out, and maybe it is because it was too specific of a thing, or it doesn't mean the same thing to everyone. So I don't want to lose it. I want to be pretty intentional of how we attach accessibility to 21st century buildings or whatever we're attaching it to. But I think it needs to be there, in words.
Well, I know you tried to put those guiding principles overlying that, but I think a lot of the feedback we heard sometimes from the community members was, well, I assume you're going to be operationally efficient. I assume you're going to do accessibility. So I don't want to pick those as one of my 6. And so it's almost like it's back to that guiding principle notion, right? And so I don't necessarily have a right answer or great suggestion for you on that yet this evening about what to do, but I think that's part of the thinking there too, is that those should just be foundational principles about how we approach, some of this planning. Like, we better be operationally efficient, we better make sure it's accessible, and that we go above, just regular compliance standards, because that's an expectation in our district. So I think that was a sentiment we heard consistently too, and probably speaks to why they're maybe down farther on the list.
It was the same during Portrait of a Graduate, where people had to pick, and they're like, well, this is important, but it's kind of covered here, and you got a lot of that overlap. But I think overall, you have done a great job of capturing the overall sentiment and categorizing it and giving us a place to, a target to aim for.
Thank you.
Right. I think, in this case, it's a competition of resources, right? So while people could say, oh, I assume you're doing these things over here, so I'm going to pick these other things, that then makes us have to do even more things. And, those things that we're just going to do because it's foundational, we're going to do it, but those things cost money at the expense of some of those other things that we might want to add on later. So that's the cautionary tale of how this played out, right? That everything is a dollar at some point.
So the last thing I'll add, and since I'm talking now and I won't interrupt Les later, is that, and to Janet's point about what we want to do on the 7th, but then coming back on the 14th, is remember, this is all leading up to a vote in November. And so that's the other piece we want to talk to the board about, is how do we make sure we get the word out about encouraging people to vote. As a public entity, we can't encourage people to vote yes or to vote no, but we can tell them to go vote, and we can also tell them what it means. And so we want to make sure, how do we structure that, and what is our message about what these votes mean to the community. And so we want to make sure that we have those conversations on the 7th and 14th as well. But thank you for your support. Really, thank you to the community that came out. We're very pleased with the feedback. It's the summer, and it's a summer like no other. And so for people to take time to engage really shows the commitment of our community to the success of our school district. So we look forward to being back together on the 7th of September.
All right. Thanks, Chase. Let's go ahead and move on. We do have a couple of, one really quick action item, and then one that'll have a little bit of discussion. The first action item is based on our public hearing that we had earlier. I don't know if there's any further discussion needed on this one. Looking around, I see no. So I would entertain a motion, please.
I move that we approve the agenda item. I don't know where I'm at. I'm sorry, the temporary access easement at the future elementary school site on North Liberty Road.
Second.
It's always good to know what you're motioning for. Kim, I think we're ready to vote.
Online voting is open.
Came out voting aye. I just lost my connection to the session.
It's really slow popping up in
All
places.
votes have been cast and the motion carries if all directors voting in favor.
All right, thank you, Kim. So the next one is, as was previewed a couple times there, some language on our resolutions for the vote. So I'll throw it out there to, looks like Les is going to jump in, unless there's somebody going to tee him up. But go ahead, Les.
Yeah, you do have in front of you the resolution as written by Beth Grove from the Allers firm. Beth does all of our bond counsel work, and so and election work for these type of things. And so she's drawn this up for us. This is just what you've seen before. However, we have taken the Pearl language out of a preliminary draft because it was decided that we would not put that on the ballot at this point in time. Doesn't mean it's not important or at this point in time, but as our previous discussions were, the legislature tried to do away with Pearl in this last session, and there's indications that may continue as well. So we didn't want to go down that road at this point in time. The important thing on both of these items, both the RPS and the PEPL, is they are a continuation of the existing language that the voters already have approved. So we're just putting a resolution out there to ask them to approve it. The PEPL will be for 10 years from 2026 to 2035. and the RPS will be from 2029 to 2050. So long past our experience in the school district probably that we're looking forward to do this. And again, just to refresh your memory, what it does is you're going to say, well, why are we doing something that so far in advance? It allows us up to provide the funding streams to borrow against to finance the projects for FMP 2.0. So, and there's also the enclosures there of what the district actions need to do in terms of posting some stuff on our website and that type of thing. And so I'll work with Kim and Kristen and that type of thing to get those things up, posted, communications out when they needed to go. So.
Are there any questions, directors? All right, I would entertain a motion.
I move that we approve the board resolution for RPS and voter-approved PEPAL levy to the November ballot.
Second.
All right, Kim, I'm ready to vote.
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast, and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
All right, thank you. Next up, Director Liaison Report. Any quick things anybody wants to throw out there? Director Malone would remind everybody she likes to go to bed, so. All right. There's a lot of stuff on there. Good job, everyone. We're going to move on. Agenda setting, I think is, we did talk about a couple of potential other things. So we'll real quick look at that 8/24 board meeting. It has all the usual suspects. We have another quarterly financial report. Is that not what we just did? Is that a different quarterly financial report? Am I wrong there?
That's the one we just did, isn't it?
Like, I think that's the one we just did.
Oh, that can probably come off. Ask him.
We don't have another report, do we, Les? Okay.
No, okay.
All right, we're gonna take that off of there. I mean, and the big thing, we're gonna have our school year one and equity update. We talked about a work session and stuff, so.
Yeah, I mean, I know with the school year, we'll only be a day in, 2 days in, so might not have a whole lot of new data, maybe not, but I would hope that we could have that work session we just talked about that night if the agenda would allow for us to get back there quicker than 4 hours.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's timely. We're gonna be adopting the policy updates officially, right? But I think having that discussion right as close to that as possible would be good.
Yeah, I think
So
we
if
could definitely have we can do the work session that night. I mean, we're ready to go and ready to present, and we'll have gotten questions from staff. After that period of time, we welcome our new teachers in tomorrow morning, and so we'll have full staff back on the 17th, and so we'll have worked through it and have some of their concerns or questions we can bring you to and what we've done to try to address it, so it'll be good.
So knowing that, I will cautiously ask if there's something that really needs to be added to the main meeting agenda, but I would want to put a focus on that work session. So if it's something we need to tackle at the board meeting, I would add it. Otherwise, I would table it for future ones. But any thoughts on things to add later? All right, and we'll get September 7th on the calendar for ops thing, and hopefully everybody can be available for that.
And Kim, we were going to check on whether or not it needed to be a committee meeting or if it had to be a work session, right? We weren't sure because it's not technically a committee of the
Yeah.
whole. And so do we have to categorize it as a committee meeting or a work session? But that's kind of logistic stuff that we'll figure out.
Probably a work session or committee charter for that only has 3 members, so. But I'll make sure, I'll double check and make sure which way it goes.
Yeah, I mean, it could be a standalone work session too. Right? Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, we could use work session, John. I think I mentioned committee of the whole, but that was probably the wrong term, so if we just need to do work session and do that item, we can do that.
We will follow the rules. That's what we're good at. And I will say, just as we discuss policy and things like that, and have that work session to figure out what we can and can't add, to remind everyone that the plan is that, you know, I think it would be like the third Tuesday in September, P&G would be meeting to review policies, so I think we can kind of timely, you know, add those things in there if we can, right? So we'll try and keep up to date with that. So feel pretty good about our agendas for the next, like, month? Okay, with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.